I lost my job, my family abandoned me, but my son gave me the courage to fight until the end. Hi everyone. I don't know how to start, but I need to tell my story. I've been mulling this over in my head for a long time, and I feel like I need to get free. Maybe someone on this forum will understand what I'm going through. My name is Alberto Garcia. I am 34 years old, and I am a lawyer. Well, I was a lawyer because I have been unemployed for over 2 years now. It wasn't always like this. At some point in my life, I thought I had everything under control. I had a promising career, a family I loved despite the difficulties, and everything seemed to be going well. But life, as it usually does, gave me an unexpected turn. When the law firm where I worked closed for financial reasons, my world began to fall apart. At first, I thought it would just be a setback. I'm sure I'll find another job quickly, I told myself, but that wasn't the case. Months went by, then a year, and job offers didn't come in. The competition was brutal, and my experience at a small firm wasn't exactly the kind of experience that the big firms were looking for. I had no savings, and although I tried to start out as a freelancer, the truth is that it is not easy to compete in a saturated market. So I was forced to do whatever was necessary to ensure a decent life for my son, Tomas. Tomas is 9 years old, and he is the reason why I continue to fight every day. He does not know how difficult everything has been, but I do. He deserves more than this, more than living with a father who no longer has a steady job, more than living with a man who, at times, does not know how to support his family. The first thing I started doing was odd jobs: plumbing repairs, landscaping, painting houses, you name it. I went from being a lawyer to doing all kinds of jobs to get some money. And every time I finished one, I felt like I had lost more of myself. But what else could I do? My son couldn't go without what he needed, and my wife, Camila, didn't make it easy for me. Sometimes when I came home after a long, tiring day and told her what I had done, she would look at me with that look on her face, that look of disdain, as if she were disappointed. She would say things like, "Why don't you look for something serious? Why don't you find a real job? A real job?" I was doing everything I could so that her son wouldn't have to worry about the future, and yet she treated me like I was a failure. "Alberto, how long are you going to continue with this? You are losing your dignity. I did not sign for this. My family tells me that it is affecting me, that if you do not get something better, I don't know if this will continue like this." I was silent, not knowing what to say. How do you explain to someone you still love that no matter how hard you try, things don't always turn out the way you expected? How do you tell your wife that it's not that she doesn't want a real job, but that opportunities just don't come along? Every time I came home, my mother looked at me reproachfully. She would say things like, "You should have prepared yourself better. Now what, are you going to stay working as a laborer?" And the worst thing of all was that I understood her frustration. I knew that she had seen me grow, that she had trusted me, but what they didn't understand was that I was doing it all for my son. The only person who never judged me was Tomas. He would always tell me, "Dad, no matter what you do, I know you're doing it for me, and I love you just the same." Those words are the only thing that kept me going, because my son, at just 9 years old, already understood something that many adults didn't understand. I wasn't doing this for myself, I was doing it for him. I was doing it so he could have a better life, so he wouldn't have to go through the same struggles I did. But the pressure kept mounting. One day, after a particularly bad fight with Camila, I sat on the couch, staring at the walls of our small apartment. I didn't feel like a family man. I felt like a shadow of my former self. Where was my pride? Where was that lawyer who once thought he could change the world? The anguish began to consume me. The idea that everything I did wasn't enough trapped me. And worse, I felt completely alone. But in that moment, as my son came up to me and hugged me, I understood something I had never fully understood until then. He trusted me, even when I didn't. And that was all I needed to keep going. The days continued to pass, and the situation did not improve. My family's criticism intensified. My mother called me daily, asking if I had found anything serious, and every time I said no, I could hear the disappointment in her voice. My father, who had always been the man who taught me to fight, looked at me as if I had failed. "I don't know what's going on with you, Alberto. You're letting life get the better of you. If you keep going like this, you're going to be nothing more than a shadow." Those words were pounding in my head day and night. How could I explain to her that I wasn't going to give up? That it wasn't easy when the doors were closed and the windows were sealed. But the worst wasn't coming from them, it was coming from Camila. The arguments between us increased. Every time I tried to talk about what I felt, she responded with more reproaches, more frustration. "Why don't you do something with your life, Alberto? Enough of the excuses. I want a future for Tomas. What are you going to do if you don't get a job? How will he live when he grows up?" I knew it. I knew he wasn't just telling me for me, but for our son's future as well. But how could I explain to him that I was doing what I could, even if it wasn't ideal? I was so caught up in my own fears that I could barely see what was around me. One day, day, after a particularly bitter fight, Camila packed some things and left. "I can't go on like this, Alberto. This is no longer life for me or for Tomas," she said in a broken voice as she grabbed her suitcase. "I'm telling you this because I love you, but I've lost you, and I'm losing myself in this chaos." I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, I couldn't say anything. It was as if everything I had been doing during that time, all those efforts, had been in vain. When I heard the door close behind her, an icy cold gripped my chest. Tomas didn't understand it right away, but when he did, his eyes filled with tears. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" he asked as he hugged me, trembling. "Is it my fault?" "No, son, it's never your fault," I replied, trying to calm myself, but the words felt empty. "Your mom is tired, but everything is going to be okay. I'm here, and I'll always be here." At that moment, I knew I had to be stronger than ever. Even though my world was falling apart, I couldn't let Tomas feel like he was the cause of it all. I needed to be a father to him, the kind of father he always imagined he would have. But things didn't improve. Work continued to be scarce, and debts began to pile up. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety, feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. How could I explain to my son that I couldn't promise him the future he deserved? One afternoon, as we were walking through the park, Tomas looked at me with that purity in his eyes and said, "Dad, I know you're doing everything you can. You don't have to worry about me. I just want you to be happy. That's all I want." Who in their right mind could be so brave at that age? How could my son, despite everything, still see the best in me when I could no longer see the best in myself? Those words were like a bucket of cold water. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't leave him alone. The next day, I decided I had to do something drastic. I couldn't continue being a man who just dragged himself through life, doing whatever it took to survive. So I made a decision. I was going to start over. I got the number of an old college friend who worked at a small law firm, told him my situation, and asked for a chance. I explained that I didn't care what he had to do, that I just needed an open door. My partner told me he would think about it, and days went by without a response. The moments of despair came back to me, but at least I felt like I was fighting for something bigger. However, my family still didn't understand. My mother and father, even more disappointed, told me that it was time for me to make a decision in my life. And Camila, even though she was no longer at home, sent me messages asking me what I was going to do to regain stability for our family. One afternoon, after receiving another text from Camila, I locked myself in the bathroom. I was so exhausted that I couldn't even think straight. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something coming through the window. Tomas had thrown a tennis ball into the bathroom. "Dad, come play with me." I stood there, staring at the ball rolling toward my feet, and I realized something. In the midst of all this chaos, in the midst of the criticism, the failures, the doubts, he still believed in me. And that had to mean something. That afternoon, after the ball was thrown by Tomas, I saw him again in the park. I played with him as if it were the last time I could do so. At that moment, the sadness and pressure that crushed me disappeared for a while, because the only thing that mattered was seeing him smile. That, for an instant, gave me a spark of hope, of life. But that hope was ephemeral. The next few days were a mix of futile efforts and disappointments. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I received a text from my college friend. It was an invitation for an interview at the law firm. My heart beat faster, but that excitement was short-lived. I knew the competition would be fierce. Nerves took over. What if I didn't make it? What if I failed again? I prepared myself as best I could, reviewing my resume and trying to appear confident, but I didn't feel that way. As I approached the building, my doubts grew more and more, but what kept me going was Tomas's face. "Dad, I know you're going to make it," he always told me. And although I didn't know if he believed my words, the only thing I knew for sure was that I had to try, even if it was one last time. The interview was difficult, much more so than I expected. They asked me technical questions that I hadn't answered in years, and I felt like a rookie. My answers were clumsy, but I tried to keep my composure. At the end, they told me they would let me know if I had been selected. I left the building with my heart in pieces, but I didn't want Tomas to see it. I didn't want him to notice that this opportunity, as small as it was, had broken me inside. That same night, Camila called me. Her voice sounded tense, almost fearful. "Alberto, we need to talk." My hands were shaking as I answered. "What's wrong?" "It's about Tomas. He's saying that he doesn't want to go to school anymore. And I don't know what to do, Alberto. He's too upset by all this. I don't know if I can carry on with this alone. And I don't know if I want Tomas to continue living in this uncertainty." My legs buckled at that moment. Hearing her say those words, hearing that my son, the same boy who had given me strength just a few days ago, was suffering like that, devastated me. Was I to blame for all of this? Was I failing him so much that my son no longer wanted to move on with his normal life? What kind of father am I? "Camila, please don't do this. I'm doing everything I can. Don't leave me alone in this. Tomas needs me more than ever, and I just want to do it right. I need a little more time, please. Time? I don't know how much longer we can wait, Alberto. I'm exhausted, and so is Tomas. Maybe it's time we understood. This isn't working. He hung up without giving me a chance to say anything else. I stared at the phone, feeling like a part of me was falling apart. How did I get to this point? How did I get to be so weak? How could I be a father if I couldn't even maintain a home? That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Camila's words, about Tomas's tears, and I felt more lost than ever. But despite all the pain, there was something inside me that kept fighting. I didn't know how or how hard, but I couldn't let everything fall apart. I couldn't let my fears and failures ruin everything. The next day, I woke up with a clear purpose. I would do everything possible to give my best, to give Tomas what he needed. I didn't know how I would achieve it, but I couldn't stay still. So I decided that I was going to look for something else, something that would get me out of this spiral. I looked for more temporary jobs. I contacted old colleagues. I asked for help on forums. It was one day after another, without rest, without knowing if I would really find something that would save me from this abyss. And then, just when I thought all was lost, something unexpected happened. One morning, as I was sitting in a cafe looking through some advertisements, a man approached me. He was a lawyer from a mid-sized firm, and he recognized me. He told me about an opening for an important case, something that needed my experience. I couldn't believe it. I was faced with an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I accepted the offer immediately. I was nervous, but I knew that this time it had to be different. I had to be stronger. Tomas needed to know that his father, even though he was down, was still getting up. But when I got home and told Tomas, I saw something in his eyes that I will never forget. It wasn't surprise or joy. It was hope. He, at just 9 years old, already knew that life isn't always fair. But he also understood that no matter how many times you fall, the important thing is to get up. And that lesson, although painful, was the one he had been teaching me all along. The opportunity that had come into my life was the only thing that kept me going. For weeks, I threw myself into my work with more intensity than ever. Every day was a new challenge, a new battle to prove that, even though I was a man who came from nothing, I had something to offer. But problems continued to lurk, even with this new job. One of the most unexpected twists came when I discovered that the law firm I was working for was not as benevolent as I had been led to believe. It was more of a stepping stone for more experienced lawyers to shine, and I, having just entered the system, was just a tool in their hand. The tasks they assigned me were not exactly what I had dreamed of when I was in law school. Instead of representing people or taking on big cases, I spent my days in a tiny office, doing paperwork, reviewing documents, and running around to keep cases from falling through. I felt like a slave to my own dream. One day, after a particularly hectic week, I ran into a colleague from the firm in the parking lot. He was nervous, seemed to be hiding something, but greeted me with a fake smile. Alberto, you have to be careful. This place is not what it seems, he said quietly. The cases we're handling, some of them are dark. Not everything that glitters is gold, and if you're not careful, you could end up being the scapegoat for something much bigger. That colleague's words echoed in my mind for days. I knew I had to choose between continuing on this path that was consuming me from within or leaving, as I had done so many times before. But leaving was not an option. My son needed stability, and the stability I had to offer him was not in my hands. I was in a mediocre job that, deep down, was also slowly killing me. The real drama began when my father, always the pragmatist, appeared in my life again. After months of not speaking to each other, he appeared at my door with terrifying news. Alberto, you need to know something. Your mother is very sick. She has been diagnosed with advanced cancer. I don't know how much time she has left. Those words left me frozen. My mother, the woman who had always been there, who had been my pillar, was now fighting something that even she could not control. Fear, despair, and above all, guilt invaded me. How could I be so distracted by my own problems when my mother was on the verge of death? And Tomas, how would I explain to him that, in the midst of all this, we would also have to deal with his grandmother's illness? The hospital visits became daily. My mother was weak, but when she saw me, her eyes would shine, as if she still had hope for something. Despite everything, she kept fighting. The worst thing of all was seeing her so vulnerable, so different from the strong and resilient woman she had always been. But the pressure kept mounting. The law firm, which had already been treating me poorly, became even more demanding. They were asking for faster and faster results with fewer resources, and with each case I took on, I felt myself drifting further away from my family. Even Tomas, who had been my biggest support, was beginning to notice that I was no longer giving him the attention he deserved. One evening, After a long day, I came home to find Thomas sitting on the couch, his eyes red and swollen. I knew instantly that something was wrong. Dad, Mom told me that we can't live with the grandparents anymore. She says there's no room for the three of us, that I have to go live with her. A cold shock went through my chest. How could it be possible that the mother of my son, who had once left me because of my problems, now wanted to take him away, no matter what I was doing for him? I sat next to Tomas, trying to find the right words. Listen, son, what's going on between your mom and me has nothing to do with you. You are the most important thing to me, and I'm going to fight to keep you by my side so that you don't lack anything. But as I said those words, I didn't know if I could really promise her something I wasn't sure I could keep. There were too many factors outside of my control, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. Everything I had done, all the fighting I had done, it felt like I was losing the battle. One night, after a long day of work and hospital visits, I received a call from Camila. Her voice was cracked, almost inaudible. Alberto, I need you to come. Tomas is in really bad shape. I don't know what to do. I stood up immediately, leaving everything behind without a second thought. When I arrived at his house, the scene was worse than I imagined. Tomas was in bed, shaking with fever, with a face so pale that I almost didn't recognize him. What happened to him? I asked, desperate. He's been sick since this morning. I don't know what to do. I can't calm him down, Camila replied, sobbing. That's when I knew the stress, uncertainty, and fear of everything that was happening, everything I had been avoiding, had finally taken its toll. My son, the reason I got up every morning, was suffering, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Guilt ate at me inside. Was all this sacrifice, all this pain, for nothing? What was the point of it all if my son was now paying the price for my failure? Thomas, with what little strength he had left, raised his head and looked at me, but he didn't say anything. He just extended his arm towards me. Couldn't let him go. Couldn't lose him. But the decisions I had made, the ones I didn't know how to correct yet, were dragging me towards a precipice from which I didn't know if I could get out. The fear I felt at that moment was like an unbearable weight on my chest. I looked at Tomas, so fragile, so vulnerable, and I realized something I had never seen clearly before. It didn't matter what he had done or what he hadn't done. It didn't matter the low-paying jobs or failed interviews. The only thing that mattered was him, my son. If I went down with him. But if anything could save us, it was the determination of a father willing to do anything for his son. That night, as Tomas slept on my lap, his fever somewhat under control, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. I remembered the sleepless nights, the doubts, the constant falls. How had I gotten to this point? How could I have gotten lost along the way? But I also remembered what my son had taught me. Without saying a single word, life is not a straight line. Sometimes you have to grope your way, fall, get up again and again. What matters is not what you have done, but what you are willing to do for those you love. The next day, something changed inside me. Tomas needed more than just a father who fought against the world. He needed a father who would teach him how to get up, who would show him how to turn pain into strength. It was time to make a decision that would set the course of our lives. That afternoon, I made a decisive decision. I would leave my job at the law firm. Even though I had no other source of income, I could no longer live that lie, that empty existence. My dreams of becoming a great lawyer were nothing compared to the responsibility of being a good father. And despite everything I had lost, what I still had was Tomas, and I was not going to let any selfish dream take him away from me. I decided to open a small legal consulting business. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but something I could control. Something where my son could see that even though life isn't always perfect, there's always a way to get ahead. It wasn't easy. Weeks went by without a single client coming in. The pressure of debt, worries about the future, all of it was constantly hitting me. But the only thing that kept me going was that little spark of hope I saw in Tomas's eyes. If he believed in me, I could believe too. And then, when all seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A client walked through the door. It was a woman who had heard about me from a friend. Her case wasn't big or important, but to me it was all I needed. With that first case, something changed. My name started getting around, and little by little, the business started to grow. It wasn't a meteoric rise, but it was steady. One day at a time, one effort at a time. Months passed, and my relationship with Tomas began to strengthen even more. We no longer lived in uncertainty, although we still had to fight for every penny. But that didn't matter. The important thing was that we were together, that every sacrifice was worth it. My mother, after spending months in treatment, began to improve slowly, but she was improving. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough to give her some hope. Life, although difficult, was beginning to smile at us. Finally, what I wanted most happened. My son looked me in the eyes with that sincere smile that only a child can have and said, "Dad, I always knew you were going to do it. I always knew you could do it." Those were the most powerful words I've ever heard in my entire entire life. Because at that moment I understood something. It's not about the career you have or the degrees you achieve. It's about being the best parent you can be, giving your best, even when everything tells you you can't. In the end, I realized that true success is not at the top of the mountain, but in how you overcome the falls. Life is not fair, but what really matters is the fight, the determination, and the people you have by your side. And if there is one thing that Tomas taught me, it is that there is always a reason to keep fighting, even when everything seems lost. The unemployed lawyer who had been a shadow of his former self was now a man who had learned what mattered most: the value of family, resilience, and sacrifice. And although the future remained uncertain, something had changed inside me. I was no longer willing to give up.
My wife manipulated me for years, until we realized the truth.
Now she is looking for me, but it is too late. I don't know where to start. I don't know how I got to this point, but here I am, telling you my story, a story I never thought I would live, but that happened nonetheless. Maybe because I never imagined that someone could manipulate me in that way, that could make me believe that everything I did for her was not enough. But in the end, everything changed. I'll start from the beginning. I married Laura a few years ago, and back then I thought I'd found the woman of my dreams. She was everything I'd ever wanted: beautiful, smart, with that smile that could melt the coldest heart. But I never realized what was to come. At first, everything was perfect, or at least I thought so. I gave myself completely to her. I worked overtime, did everything she asked of me, provided for her in every way. I did it because I loved her deeply, because I believed that was what true love meant: sacrificing yourself for the person you loved most. Laura didn't work. She always had an excuse for not working. I don't feel well. I don't have the energy for it. It's not my thing. And I, like a fool, always gave her another excuse. I always believed her. My friends would say to me, "Hey, why are you working so much? Don't you realize that she's taking advantage of you?" And I, blinded by love, would tell them no, that it was okay, that she had the right to rest, that everything she did was for us. But all that only distanced me further and further from reality. Years went by and Laura still didn't do anything for herself, and I was increasingly exhausted. But you know what the worst thing is? Even though my life was falling apart, she never stopped asking me for more. Do this, go for that, work more hours. I want this, I want that. But it wasn't a please or an I would like to. It was more like an order disguised as a request, a need for control, to have everything without giving anything in return. One day, after working late, I came home and saw her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like nothing mattered. My first instinct was to go make her some dinner, like always, but something stopped me. Something wasn't right. I don't know if it was her attitude or the way she looked at me, but in that instant, my world changed. Suddenly, a message on her phone flashed across the screen as the screen lit up. It wasn't a work message or a friend's. It was from a man. And the worst part of it all, she was saying things to him that she had never said to me. Things like, "I miss you, I hope to see you soon," and "This love has no end." My heart stopped. Couldn't believe it. Laura, my wife, had been cheating on me. While I was falling over myself for her, she was giving herself to someone else. I can't describe the anger, the pain, and the sadness I felt at that moment. My mind couldn't process it. Everything I had done for her, everything I had sacrificed, was worthless. And the worst thing was knowing that I had been being a fool, that I hadn't realized what was going on around me. I felt more alone than ever. I confronted her that same night, my heart pounding in my chest. I asked her directly about the message. At first, she denied it, tried to justify it, but little by little, the truth came out. She told me that she didn't love me anymore, that she didn't feel the same way about me anymore. It was like a stab in the chest, a fatal blow that I never saw coming. That's when I decided to do something I never thought I would do: leave her. I had reached my limit. I packed my things and left the house. I never wanted to see her again. And so, I was left alone, heartbroken, but also with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The days passed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Yes, the pain was still there, but I felt stronger, as if the burden on my shoulders had been lightened. I began to rebuild my life little by little. I started to focus on myself, on regaining the peace I had lost for years. And most importantly, I realized what I had been doing wrong all this time. I had forgotten about myself to give everything to someone who didn't deserve it. But the story does not end here. The weeks after I left Laura were chaotic, but ones that helped me see things clearly. At first, I didn't know what to do with my life. I felt lost, like I had lost my way, but little by little I began to find purpose. I started hanging out with old friends, working out, picking up things I had put aside for years. My mind, for the first time in a long time, was clear. I was free. Free from the lies, the false promises, the manipulation. What shocked me the most was what happened when Laura realized I had made the decision to leave for real. The last time I saw her was when she came to pick me up from work. Her face was pale, the dark circles under her eyes, as if everything in her life was falling apart. Beside her, the man she had cheated on me with, a guy I had never met before, stood distant, as if he was also expecting the worst. But what hurt me the most wasn't seeing them together. It was the way Laura looked at me. There was no love in her eyes anymore. There was only regret. She told me I had made a mistake, that everything I had done was because I didn't know what I had, that I was confused. She asked me to come back, that everything would be different this time. But something inside me had already died. There was no love anymore. There was no room for forgiveness anymore. My life with her had been a lie, and I wasn't willing to go back to that reality. I just stared at her indifferently, something I never thought I would be capable of doing. The love I once felt for her was gone. In its place was something stronger, respect for myself, for the man who had fought for her, for our relationship, but who had also been ignored and trampled on for far too long. I turned my back on her and walked away, never looking back. Soon after, Laura started calling insistently. Each time I picked up the phone, her voice sounded more broken, more desperate. I asked her to stop looking for me. I had come too late. Her regret was not enough to repair the damage she had caused me. Her messages turned into letters, the letters into email. She sent me pictures of the things she had promised to do if I came back, as if that would change what she had done. But in the end, all she had to offer me were empty promises. And then, the most unexpected moment came. A month later, I ran into her in a coffee shop. She was sitting alone at a table, looking at me with her eyes full of sadness. She stood up when she saw me enter, and before I could react, she was in front of me, begging me to listen to her. "Please, just listen to what I have to say," she said. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to do, but I agreed. Laura explained to me that the man she had cheated on me with was not what she had thought. He was just an escape, a way to fill the emptiness she felt inside of her. And after everything she had done, she now realized what she had lost. "I need you," she told me, with a sincerity I found hard to believe. "All I am now, all I have left is you. I promise I will change. I will do everything in my power to prove to you that I am worth it." But her words no longer touched me as they once did. There was no room in my heart for her anymore. What Laura didn't know, and what she couldn't even imagine, was that while she was busy ruining our relationship, I had changed completely. I was no longer the same man who sacrificed himself for her. I was no longer the man who put her above everything else. Now, I was a man who had rediscovered himself, who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. I no longer depended on anyone to make me feel complete. Laura begged me for hours. She cried. She showed me all her pain, but I no longer felt anything for her. When she realized that she could not get what she wanted, her attitude changed. The woman I once loved transformed into someone unrecognizable. She began to insult me, to blame me for everything. She told me that I was to blame for our relationship not working, that I had left her alone. But I no longer listened to her. I no longer cared what she said. The cruelest twist came when I learned that, after so much insistence, she had tried to get back into the life of her ex, the man she had cheated on me with. She had sought him out. She had called him. She had tried to rekindle that broken relationship, but the answer she received was even more devastating. He had rejected her. He didn't need her, and that was what destroyed her. At that moment, Laura realized that everything she had done to manipulate me, everything she had done to get what she wanted, had led her nowhere. But it was already too late. Laura's desperation reached a point where she could no longer hide it. She started showing up at my work, in the places I frequented, in my friendships, even on social media, sending messages with apologies, trying to convince me to help her out of the emotional storm she was in. But I was no longer the man she had known. The man who used to give in, who used to be her refuge, was gone. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Your ex is in the hospital," she said in a shaky voice. My heart stopped for a moment. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real. Laura in the hospital? Why? First, I didn't know what to do, but something inside me told me I had to go, if only to close this page for good. I headed to the hospital, my thoughts a whirl. What could have happened to her? When I arrived, I saw her there, in a hospital bed, her face swollen, her eyes red from crying, and an expression that made me think she had realized what she had lost, what she had done. But the most shocking thing was not her appearance. What surprised me was the reason she was there. Laura had had such a huge emotional crisis that, in a fit of desperation, she tried to take an overdose of medication. The nurse explained to me that it was a failed attempt, fortunately. But what really broke my heart was what Laura told me when I entered entered the room. In a weak voice, she looked at me with eyes full of regret, and for the first time, I could see the vulnerability she had always denied me. "I never knew how much I loved you until it was too late. I understand now what I did, but I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to live with this anymore." It was like a stab in the chest, seeing the woman I once loved, the one who left me for another, the one who used me, completely broken in front of me. For a moment, my impulse was to stay by her side, hold her and comfort her. But my mind, my heart, was no longer with her. My instinct told me not to take that step. I asked her if she really understood the damage she had caused me, if she really realized how she had destroyed me. But what she answered left me speechless. "I didn't ask you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that I will always love you." And that was the last time I saw her. I never looked for her again. I never answered her messages again. That was the Laura who had created her own destiny and who had destroyed everything she had ever had in her grasp. There was no room for mercy anymore. There was nothing she could do to change the past. As she fell deeper into her emotional abyss, my life moved on. Not only had I distanced myself from her, but I had distanced myself from everything that relationship represented. The guilt, the despair, the fear of rejection. I realized that everything I had experienced with Laura was not love. It was an invisible chain that kept me prisoner, a lie that had made me believe that love was about excessive sacrifices, about suffering in silence for another's happiness. But the truth was that love, true love, should never hurt. Months later, I learned that Laura had left her hometown and moved somewhere else, trying to start over. I received a message from a mutual friend telling me that she had hit rock bottom. She had lost her job, her friends had abandoned her, and she had isolated herself from the world. The man she had cheated on me with never came looking for her again. And now, for the first time, she was facing the harsh reality. Everything she had ever wanted had fallen apart, and the one person who had always been there, willing to bear everything for her, was no longer in her life. But even as I heard all this, my heart no longer had room for pity. I realized that everything I had been through had not only taught me to be stronger, but also to realize what I deserve. I didn't deserve to live tied to someone who made me feel less than. I didn't deserve to be the emotional punching bag of someone who only saw me as a source of support for her, never giving anything in return. Time passed, and although Laura tried to contact me once more, I no longer cared. I had healed, I had left that shadow behind. I was not the same man who had met her. I had found my purpose, I had found my happiness again, and most importantly, I had learned to love myself. One day, while I was having coffee at a coffee shop with a friend, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to see Laura. She was different, more mature, less vulnerable, but something in her eyes told me that she had learned an important lesson, one that she hadn't understood when we were together. "I've been looking for you all this time," she said, her voice cracking. "And even though I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your time, I want to tell you that I will always love you, that I am grateful for everything you did for me. But I know that there is nothing left to do." I looked at her for a long moment, and that's when I realized something crucial. Her regret no longer meant anything to me. She no longer had power over my life. She could no longer manipulate me or make me feel guilty for her pain. My life was already in my hands, and I had decided not to let the past dictate my future. Laura's presence in front of me left me silent for a few seconds. I didn't know if I should feel compassion, if I should stay silent, or if I should just move on without saying another word. I was completely out of place, but she was still there, insisting that something could be done to fix things. It was then that, in a whisper that I almost didn't hear, she said to me, "I am pregnant." For a moment, the world stopped. The thought of being a father again, after everything that had happened, paralyzed me. My hands began to sweat, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. How could this be? What did this mean for me, for her, for the life I had begun to rebuild? Laura, her eyes full of desperation, waited for me to react, but I just stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. "Who is it from?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit. Her response was a heavy silence, as if she already knew what I was thinking. Finally, she said, "He's yours. He was always yours, Gonzalo. I know that everything I've done to you cannot be forgiven, but this son is not to blame for anything. He is the only reason I still have some hope left." My heart was pounding. How could I think of a child in the midst of so much chaos? How could I be responsible for something so big when everything in my life had been on the brink of ruin? She had destroyed our relationship, she had walked away from me, and now, somehow, she was asking me to help her get back what we had lost. "I'm sorry, Laura," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "I'm not the man you need for this. I'm not the man who can save you now." Laura, as if it were her last hope, began to cry. Her tears fell as if she could no longer stop them. "Please, Gonzalo, Gonzalo. Do it for him. I don't want him to grow up without his father. I need you to be in his life." But as I looked at her, something inside me crumbled. I no longer felt anything for her. And although the thought of a child still haunted me, I couldn't fall into the same trap as before. I could no longer be the lifeguard for someone who had constantly drowned me. I turned my back on her, letting the weight of her words fade away. That child's future did not depend on my past decisions, but on the ones I would make now. However, Laura didn't give up. That same night, while I was trying to sleep, she called me again, this time in a much calmer tone of voice. "I understand you, Gonzalo. I know you're doing the right thing for yourself, but I want you to know something I've never told you before. I've always loved you, and now I know it more than ever. I'm letting you go because you deserve to be happy, but I don't want my son to grow up without knowing what his father meant to me, to us. I want you to know that you'll always be a part of my life, in some way, even if you don't want to anymore." He hung up before I could say anything. I was convinced that if he stayed in my life, I would only go in circles. His regret no longer changed anything. I could no longer be dragged into that emotional spiral. Months passed. Laura tried to find me several times, and her pregnancy progressed. I learned from my mother, who kept me informed without wanting to pry too much, that Laura had given birth. A healthy boy, I was told. I never learned his name. I was never interested. But one day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a video. I opened it without much hope, but what I saw left me cold. It was a video of Laura, holding her son in her arms, looking directly into the camera. "This is your son," she said, her voice shaking, "and this is the only legacy I have left from you. Sometimes I think that everything that happened was a dream, and that I don't deserve anything that happened to me. But he needs to know who his father was." The image of that baby in her arms, so vulnerable, made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, a need to protect. Somehow, I felt that this creature, even though a product of all the chaos, deserved better. But in that instant, I also knew that my life no longer belonged to Laura or her mistakes. My path was set, and although the responsibility of being a father would always be my path, my life was not going to be defined by the decisions of others. Over the next few days, uncertainty gripped me. Laura, in her desperation, had touched the most sensitive nerve I had, the father I always wanted to be. But my mind knew what my heart still didn't want to accept, that I couldn't go back to being the man she expected. There was no more room for sacrifice. But the most shocking thing of all came one morning when I received a letter on my doorstep. It was from Laura. This time, she didn't apologize or expect anything from me. There was just a single handwritten line. "I've given you everything I could, and now I'm letting you go. This is the end. Take care of yourself, Gonzalo." I stared at the letter for several minutes, almost as if the words would fade away or take on another meaning if I read them again. But they didn't. It was just there, crystal clear, like a final goodbye. There was no more room for regret, no more turns to take. Laura had done all she could, and so had I. All that was left was to move on, even if life had left me scarred. I took a couple of days to process it, to reflect on everything that had happened, but something inside me, something deeper, told me that I was ready to close the chapter. I didn't want to look back anymore. I didn't want to hold on to what could have been anymore, but to what I was about to be. A renewed man, stronger, more aware of his worth. The next day, I made a life-changing decision. I would sell the house I shared with Laura. There was no point in holding on to a place filled with memories that only hurt me anymore. That house represented my failure, my blind surrender. I needed to free myself from that bondage, and I did. I sold everything that was left of the life I shared with her. The money from the sale allowed me to move into a small but cozy apartment, far from the city, where I could start over. I didn't need luxuries, just peace. For weeks, I immersed myself in personal projects, began studying again, writing, teaching what I knew. My life began to take a direction I had never imagined, and best of all, I no longer felt the weight of past decisions. It was then that one day, while walking through the park with a cup of coffee in my hand, I came across something I hadn't expected. A little boy, no older than 8, running towards me with a ball. He smiled and, seeing me stumble and almost fall, burst into laughter that made the world, for a moment, stop again. Something in his laugh, something in his gaze made me remember Laura's son. I couldn't help but smile, as if everything I had lived through finally made sense. "Oops, sorry, sir," said the boy, embarrassed. "It's okay. It's nothing," I replied, regaining my balance. Seeing the boy's smile, I realized something. I, who had lost so much, had gained much more than I thought. I had rebuilt my life, learned to love myself, and let go of the past, not for Laura, but for me. And best of all, I now understood that self-love, inner peace, did not come from being tied to a past that no longer belonged to me. Back at my apartment, as I sat in front of the window, watching the sunset, I received a text. It was from an unknown number. I thought about ignoring ignoring it, but something made me open it. I'm glad to know that you're okay, Gonzalo. I can finally tell you that I love you, but in the right way. Thank you for everything. This is the last message I send you. It was Laura, and although her message touched me, it no longer had power over me. There was no longer any resentment, no longer any pain. The story between us was already written, and what mattered now was what I was going to write in my own future. And for the first time in a long time, I could look at the horizon without fear, knowing that life had many more surprises ahead for me. And so, I closed the door on a chapter of my life that, although painful, had given me the tools to become the man I am today. At that moment, I understood that the scars of the past are not wounds that define us, but marks that teach us to be stronger. My dream as an actor destroyed my life, but I still made it. This is my story. I was always told that dreams were for the brave, that if you really set your mind to it, nothing could stop you. I was a kid with big aspirations. My biggest dream was to be an actor. I didn't want fame or money, just the recognition that I had achieved something big. And of course, I wanted to be someone who inspired others to never give up, no matter what the world thought of them. It all started in my small town, where there were hardly any opportunities for someone like me. No one around me believed in what I was doing. My friends, people in my neighborhood, even my parents didn't understand me. But I knew what I wanted, and determination drove me forward. My girlfriend, Valeria, was one of the few people who supported me in the beginning. I remember how she would hug me before every audition, telling me that one day I would make it. But over time, everything started to change. The auditions became longer and my time with her shorter. Opportunities became scarce and rejections piled up. Still, every time I was told no, it only made me stronger, or so I thought. One day, after months of trying, I received a message from a talent agency that had managed to see something in me. It was my chance. I was excited. I felt like all my effort had finally paid off. I had finally achieved something. I told Valeria, and her eyes sparkled with hope, but she just said, "That's good, but what about us?" I looked at her confused. Us? This is what I always wanted, Valeria. It's my chance. But she didn't look at me the same way. She couldn't understand how I was so focused on something that, for her, wasn't guaranteed. "I can't watch you do this anymore. You don't have time for me. You have to decide, because I don't know if I want to be in a relationship with someone who prefers to dream instead of live reality." That was the first time I understood that, in his mind, I had stopped being the man I believed in. He told me that we were no longer working and that he had to leave. I felt as if the world was collapsing on me. But at the same time, I told myself that I had to move on. Sometimes, when you pursue a dream, people are left behind. And that, although painful, I understood the hard way. My parents were supportive at first. My mother told me that everything would be okay, that I should keep fighting. But soon, things changed. Months went by and I still couldn't find success. I started accumulating debts, not being able to pay the rent. I lived off temporary jobs I hated, but I needed the money. My parents started putting pressure on me. "When will you make a real decision, son? How much longer are you going to live on dreams? Are you going to keep going like this, hoping someone will give you a chance?" They started to distance themselves, to stop calling me. Every time I tried to talk about my dream, I felt that what had once been support had turned into disdain. "You should be more realistic. No one is going to give you a chance." That was what they told me one afternoon, right after I had been fired from another job. And that was the last time I spoke to them. Loneliness became my friend, and tiredness became my daily routine. Every audition seemed to be the same story. They told me to try again, that I was good, but that I wasn't what they were looking for. I didn't know if my dream was really worth it anymore. But what kept me going was the idea that I couldn't give up. One night, after returning from yet another low-paying job, I found myself in the corner of a bar where I overheard a conversation that would change my life. A film producer was sitting at a table, talking about an independent film that needed an actor like me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were referring to me unwittingly, as if I were a missed opportunity. At that moment, I made up my mind. That night, I gathered my courage and walked over. "Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt," I said nervously, "but I heard they're looking for an actor. I could do it." The producer looked at me, gave me a disconcerting smile, and then simply asked, "Do you have anything to show?" It was my moment. I said, "Yes, give me a few minutes." He asked me to improvise. I was so nervous I could barely think, but I did, and somehow I managed to capture something. I managed to get his attention. At the end of my improvisation, the producer looked at me and said something I will never forget. "You have something. Come to the office tomorrow. Maybe you have a chance." Somehow, I had managed to get someone to see what I saw in myself. But it wasn't all that easy. That same night, I received a text. It was Valeria. "Why haven't you called me? I need to talk to you." Anxiety filled me. What was I going to tell him? That I was now getting closer to a dream I thought was already lost? That I had gone through so much pain and sacrifice to get to this moment, but something inside me, something that told me there was still hope, made me answer him. I want to see you. I need to talk. The next day, I met Valeria in the same park where we used to sit when everything seemed simpler. When I saw her, something in her eyes made me doubt. She was not the same Valeria I had left. This time, her eyes did not reflect hope, but rather a mixture of regret and something else, fear. How have you been? I asked, trying to sound casual, but knowing there was nothing casual about our conversation. She looked at the floor before answering. I'm okay, but that's not what I want to talk about, she said, her voice breaking. Gonzalo, after everything that happened, I realized how much I failed you. I let you go when you needed me the most. I saw you fight for your dream and I left you alone. A lump formed in my throat. I remembered how he had abandoned me at the most difficult moment, but I couldn't deny that something inside me still wished things had been different. However, something bigger, something stronger told me that I couldn't keep looking back. I had grown accustomed to loneliness, to pain, and I had begun to understand that, to get where I wanted to go, I had to let go of everything that tied me down. Valeria, things aren't the same as before, I replied, taking a breath. I've changed. I've been through so much, but now I see that suffering made me stronger. I can't go back to the way we were. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Gonzalo. I've been so stupid. I didn't know how much I loved you until I saw you disappear from my life. I don't care what it takes. I want to be a part of your life again. I support you. I promise that this time I'll be by your side. Those words, so sincere, made me hesitate, but I couldn't fall into the same trap. I couldn't let my heart, so accustomed to disappointment, make decisions for me. I had spent too long waiting for someone to believe in me. Why would I give them another chance when my life was finally starting to change? I'm sorry, Valeria, but I'm not the same anymore. What you wanted from me no longer exists, I said, as I stood up, leaving the conversation behind. That was the last time I saw her. Maybe I would regret it one day, but at that moment, I knew that my fate could no longer depend on anyone else. My meeting with the producer the next day was like a dream come true. I arrived at his office, and after several tests and rehearsals, I was told that I had landed the lead role in an independent film. The producer gave me a smile that made me feel that all my effort, all my suffering had been worth it. Welcome to the project, Gonzalo. We have a lot of work to do, he said, shaking my hand firmly. For weeks, I immersed myself in filming. It was exhausting emotionally and physically. Every day was a challenge. At times, I felt like I was about to give up, that this dream wasn't for me. But I remembered what I had left behind, the loneliness, the self-doubt, the people who no longer supported me, and that drove me to keep going. But then one afternoon, while I was reviewing the script, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was my mother. Gonzalo, where are you? Why aren't you answering? Your father is very ill. He has a serious health problem, and we don't know if he'll be able to bear it. My legs shook, my mind clouded. For years, my parents had been the first to tell me to stop dreaming. Now, I needed their support more than ever, but I knew I couldn't go back to the life I'd left behind. Couldn't turn back. That night, as memories of my childhood and my relationship with them haunted me, I realized that I was no longer just an actor in a movie. I was someone who, despite everything I had lost, had made it this far, and I could no longer allow anything or anyone to keep me from what I had built. I decided not to go see my father. It wasn't easy. I couldn't ignore what they meant to me, but I understood that this was my time. This was my dream and my life, and I wasn't going to let the sacrifices I had already made go in vain. As the months passed, my career began to take off. The film received praise, and I began to be recognized as an emerging talent in the world of independent film. But even as the lights of fame began to shine for me, there was something that plagued me, something I couldn't let go of. Valeria. Weeks went by without any news from her, but one afternoon while I was at a press event, someone approached me. It was her. "How are you, Gonzalo?" she said with a smile that, despite everything, was still familiar. "I know you walked away, but I'm here because, after everything we've been through, I want to ask for your forgiveness. I followed you from afar. I've seen everything you've achieved, and I'm so sorry for not believing in you." I saw her there, with a different attitude, more mature, but something inside me had already changed. I knew we were no longer the same. I couldn't go back to the life I had left behind, or to the empty promises she once made me. What's happened is done, and while I appreciate what you say, I'm no longer the man you left, I replied, looking directly into his eyes. His face changed, but he didn't insist. Somehow, he understood. As I walk down red carpets and my career continues to rise, I think about everything I left behind. And while dreams can be the engine that takes you far, they also teach you that the road is full of sacrifices, of moments you can never get back. But in the end, the only one who has to believe in you is yourself. Because if you don't believe in your own dream, no one else will. The movie that had given me the opportunity to shine was just the beginning, but life didn't allow me to relax for long. With success came new challenges, and fame brought with it a price I wasn't prepared to pay. The paparazzi, the rumors, and the expectations became increasingly heavy. People who had previously ignored me now saw me as an example, but also as someone who had to live up to their expectation. Everyone had something to say about my life, about my career, and most painfully, about my future. Despite all that, nothing affected me as much as Valeria's constant presence in my thoughts. She had disappeared for months, but I knew that, sooner or later, she would reappear. People in the media began to ask questions about my personal life, and whenever they asked me about her, I had to lie, say that everything was fine, but it wasn't. One night, after a particularly grueling press conference, I received a text on my phone. It was from Valeria. The text simply said, "I need to talk to you. It's important." It didn't take me long to decide what to do. Somehow, I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't avoid the subject anymore. Maybe, somehow, it was time to close that chapter, or at least that's what my heart was telling me, even though my mind was screaming at me that I was about to fall into the trap once again. We met at a cafe. At first, the atmosphere was tense. I watched her, waiting for her to say something that would make me feel like we were worth seeing. But she wasn't so sure how to start. When she finally did, her voice was almost inaudible. "Gonzalo, what happened? I never wanted it to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you. But after all this time, I realized that I was always wrong. I let you go when I needed you the most, and now, after seeing you accomplish all this, I realized that I was a fool." Her tone was full of regret, but something told me I shouldn't trust her anymore. I'd experienced this before. Yet, as I looked at her, I felt a mix of sadness and compassion. She had been the person I loved, the one I thought would be my companion forever, and I still held a small part of me that loved her. "Valeria, everything you did hurt me more than you can imagine, but it also made me realize something, that only I am responsible for my life. Only I can decide what I want to be, and I no longer have room in my life for someone who makes me doubt that." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to expect from you, Gonzalo. I just wanted you to know that I've missed you. I don't want it to end like this. I need you." That word, need, froze me, because who really needed me? She, who had left me when I needed her the most, or me, who had come so far with no one by my side, fighting only for my dreams? What did it mean to need someone when life had taught you that you couldn't depend on anyone but yourself? I can't be the person you need. I've done all this for me, Valeria. For me. And I've learned to live without depending on anyone else. Weeks passed after that conversation, and life continued on. My career continued to grow. My name was starting to appear everywhere. Magazines, interviews, and awards. Everything seemed to be lining up perfectly, but I still felt empty. I felt like something was missing, that there was something beyond success that I couldn't achieve. And somehow, my mind kept going back to that conversation with Valeria. Was it selfish of me to reject her? Should I have given her a second chance? But everything changed one night. I was at a gala party, surrounded by celebrities, when I received an unexpected call. It was from my mother. We hadn't talked much since I shot to fame, and I didn't expect her to call me in the middle of all the chaos. "Your father is in critical condition. The situation is very serious. He told me that the only thing he wanted before he left was to see you." My world had come crashing down on me. All the money, awards, and recognition didn't matter. My father, the man who had taught me to be strong, was on the brink of death, and I wasn't there for him. I felt like a failure, like everything I had accomplished was worthless if I couldn't be there for my family when it mattered. "I'm on my way now," I said, hanging up the call and leaving the party. The glamour of star life faded in a second. There was only one thing left on my mind, my family. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was tense. My father was in bed, weak, his breathing labored. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. It was at that moment that I realized how much I had neglected those who had always supported me. For years, I had pushed them aside in pursuit of a dream that now seemed meaningless without them. "Dad, I'm so sorry," I said, taking his hand. "I shouldn't have left you alone." My father smiled weakly with difficulty. "Son, what you did was worth it. I know it cost you, but what matters most to me is that you keep fighting for your dreams, that you keep moving forward." Those words, in the midst of sadness, were a shock of reality. My father always believed in me, even when I doubted him. And now, in his final moments, he was giving me the permission I so desperately needed to continue on my path. After that experience, life took an even more unexpected turn for me. Valeria appeared again. This time, she was not the same woman I had known. Now, she seemed like a broken person, without strength, without the brilliance that once defined her. Gonzalo, please listen. I know I can't change what happened, but I need your help. I can't go on without you. I looked at him, but something in me had changed forever. I was no longer the same person she had known. I can't be what you need, Valeria, I replied.
I'm sorry.
And so, with my father gone and that chapter coming to a definitive close, I understood that true success was not being a famous actor, but being able to look back, learn from my mistakes, and ultimately move forward without looking back. Years passed since then. My career continued to rise, but I now saw fame from a different perspective. People recognized me, but I was no longer that star desperate for attention. I began to take control of my life in a way I never imagined. The awards, the interviews, the spotlights, none of that mattered anymore. My real battle, the one that taught me everything I needed to learn, was the one I fought within myself. It was on a rainy afternoon, years after my last meeting with Valeria, when the phone rang. It was not my mother's or some friend in the industry. The number was unknown. When I answered, I was met with a voice that chilled my blood. Hello, Gonzalo.
I'm Valeria.
I need you to listen to me. My legs went limp, but I immediately pulled myself together. Valeria, what do you want? Her voice, though empty and cold, was filled with desperation. I swear, Gonzalo, I'm sorry for everything I said about what I wanted to change. But I'm not calling you to ask you for anything. I'm calling you to tell you something important. At that moment, something inside me clicked. I couldn't imagine what else he could possibly have to say to me. What's wrong? The pause was so long that it felt like time had stopped. Finally, she spoke, but it wasn't what I expected. I had an accident, a serious accident, and I need you to know something before it's too late. The man who was with you, the one who left you, wasn't me. Everything I did it because I felt like you'd never be enough. But the truth is, you were always the best thing I ever had. And if you have to hear one thing from me now, it's that I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry, Gonzalo. I'm so sorry. I was silent for a long moment. I couldn't process it. Everything that had happened, all the pain and struggles, seemed like a cruel joke of fate. Valeria, what do you want from me now? Anger and sadness mixed in my voice, but I couldn't stop listening. I just want you to know that what you did was the best thing you could have done. If you hadn't let me go, I would have never changed. I would have never understood what love really is. And now, I just want you to live a happy life. I don't want you to come see me or help me. Just, if you were ever hurt by what I did, I just want you to remember me for what I could have been, not what I was. The call ended on a somber note, and my heart felt like it was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. I was about to do something I never imagined. I didn't want to forgive her, couldn't, but at the same time, the understanding of her words began to sink in. Sometimes, love wasn't enough to change people, and maybe I had come too late for what could have been. A few more weeks passed, and as I continued with my life, the news of Valeria spread in the media. It was not the kind of story I had expected, but it ended up being bigger than any success in my career. Valeria had disappeared from the media, and no one knew what had happened to her. Her last interview had left everyone with the feeling that she was looking for redemption, but along the way, she had found a bitter truth about herself. One day, after weeks of uncertainty, I came across an article in a newspaper. They were talking about a new project that was taking shape, a project of inmates, people who had fallen into their own abyss of wrong decisions, and how, through reflection and hard work, they could find a way out. The surprise came at the end, when I realized that Valeria had been the creator of this project. Not only had she changed her life, but she had decided to dedicate her time to helping others find what she herself had lost: purpose. Somehow, she had begun to redirect pain into something positive. And there I was, standing in front of the mirror. In that moment, I understood something I never knew before. Maybe everything that had happened between us had been a lesson, something that prepared me for the life I was living now. Valeria had shown me that love wasn't always enough, but true strength came from knowing when to let go and, more importantly, when to forgive, though not for her, but for myself. My career continued, but it wasn't the same. I no longer sought external validation. I didn't need to be the most famous or the most recognized. I had found something more important: inner peace. And maybe, just maybe, that peace was the true reward. As I looked out at the horizon from my window, a smile spread across my face. I might never know if Valeria found her redemption, but I did know that I had found mine. And that was the only story that really mattered.
He was humiliated. My
girlfriend left me and my family abandoned me, but today I am a successful YouTuber. Hi, I'm Jose, a lower-class kid who always had a dream. No, it wasn't about money or fame. My dream was to be a YouTuber. Since I was little, I always watched videos from my favorite creators and thought, I can do this too. But like many people in my situation, life isn't always as easy as it's imagined in videos on the internet. I grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities were conspicuous by their absence. My family, my mother and my sister Demar Damaris didn't have much. Sometimes we barely made ends meet, and food was always something that needed to be taken care of. But that never stopped me. I had something that others couldn't see, an unstoppable passion for creating content. It all started when, at 19, I decided to record my first video. I used my mobile phone, which wasn't even the newest, and placed it on a pile of books, hoping it would give me a better view. The content, well, wasn't anything special. Video games, a couple of bad jokes, and some ideas I saw on the internet. I uploaded it to YouTube without much expectation, just hoping that someone somewhere would see it. The answer was nothing. No likes, no comments, absolutely nothing. But that didn't stop me. I decided to do it again, and then again, and again. I was determined to keep going, even though everyone around me told me it was a waste of time. My girlfriend, Catalina, who was always supportive at the beginning, started to change her attitude. At first, she encouraged me to keep creating content, telling me that I just needed a little luck. But little by little, things started to change. The reviews started to come faster than the likes, and I felt more and more pressure. One day, Catalina looked at me with that cold look, the same look I had never seen in her, and said, "Jose, don't you see that this is not going to work? What are you doing with your life? You are wasting your time. You have no future in this." Those words hit me like a bucket of cold water. Catalina had always been my support person, but now she was no longer believing in me. It was like something inside me had broken. My world seemed to be falling apart, and just when I needed her the most, she left me. She left with the excuse that she needed someone who was more realistic. My friends, who had previously joked about my videos, started making fun of me. "Are you still doing that, Jose?" they would say, laughing and pointing at my cheap phone. I felt more alone than ever. My mother was busy with work, and my sister Damaris, who was only 12 years old, was the only one who still believed in me. She always told me, "Jose, don't give up. I know you'll make it. I'll see you on TV one day." Her words were the only ones that kept me going. One day, while I was recording a new video in my bedroom, the same room where I used to have to ask my mother's permission to use the phone, Damaris walked in unannounced. She stared for a few seconds and then approached with her typical enthusiasm. "Jose, don't let them make you feel bad. I support you. You are my hero." She looked at me with those hopeful eyes, and something inside me lit up. In that moment, I realized that it didn't matter how many times I fell. It didn't matter how many people told me I couldn't. What mattered was that someone, even if it was my little sister, still believed in me. She didn't see a loser, but a brother who had a dream. I decided not to give up. My videos were still bad, my equipment was still poor, but something was changing. I started studying more about editing, watching YouTube tutorials, researching how to improve my content. Everything I couldn't afford, I learned for free. My work, my effort, and the hours I spent recording and editing started to make some sense. Little by little, people started to notice my videos. Some left me positive comments, others just watched my videos for a couple of seconds. But I didn't care. I knew I was closer. Damaris, at 12 years old, was still by my side. In fact, she started being part of my videos. She helped me record, gave me ideas, gave me that spark that I was missing. Her little tips became an essential part of my content. Finally, after months of tireless work, one day the miracle happened. A video of mine went viral. Yes, something as simple as a gameplay of a trendy video game with my own comments, something simple. The number of views began to rise like never before. I received a message from YouTube telling me that my channel had met the requirements to be monetized. Couldn't believe it. After so many years of struggle, of ridicule, of feeling like a failure, I had achieved something. But like everything in life, the road is never easy. Although the positive comments started to arrive, the negative ones did too. But they didn't hurt me as much anymore. I didn't care what other people thought anymore. What mattered to me was that I had finally achieved my dream. And best of all, my sister Damaris was there, by my side, celebrating. The same girl who never stopped believing in me, who helped me to keep going, to stay strong. But just as my life was beginning to change, Catalina appeared again. And what happened next? Well, that's another chapter. After my channel started to take off, things started to change. People started to see me differently, though not everyone. My mother, who was always busy working, saw what was going on, and although she showed some pride at first, she soon began to doubt. "Jose, do you think this is what you really want to do with your life? What if this is all just a fad? What if one day you run out of followers? What are you going to do then?" Her concern was understandable, but it hurt me. I felt like I had finally found something that made me happy, something that allowed me to be myself. And while Damaris was always there to encourage me, my mother was starting to be a voice of doubt that made me question my own achievements. It was at this point that the story of Catalina, my ex-girlfriend, came into play again. After months of not hearing from her, one day I received a Facebook message. It was written with a mix of regret and desperation. "Jose, can I talk to you? I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. At first, I didn't want to even read it. I remembered her face when she left me, the way she told me I was a loser, that I couldn't keep living with someone who had no future. But something in her message made me doubt. What if everything she was saying now was true? What if, in the end, I wasn't the same boy she had left behind? Nevertheless, I decided to answer. I wanted to know why he was looking for me. When I finally agreed to talk to her, she said something that left me speechless. "I've been watching your videos, Jose. I'm so sorry. When I left you, I didn't know what I was doing. I see what you've accomplished, and honestly, I always knew you had something special. I've been following you for months now, and I've realized how stupid I was." Catalina's words, full of regret, were like a stab. I couldn't help but think of everything that had happened, how she left me at the worst time of my life, when I needed her the most. But the most painful thing wasn't that she was looking for me now that things were looking up for me. The most painful thing was that she realized it too late. "I don't know if forgiveness is what I'm looking for right now, Jose," she continued, "but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. If you want, we can try again." Her proposal left me completely baffled. I didn't know what to do. On the one hand, I felt I had a right to give her a chance, after everything we'd been through. But on the other hand, I remembered everything that happened and how it made me feel. I couldn't just forget the words of contempt she threw at me at the time, or the pain she caused by leaving when I needed her the most. Couldn't sleep that night. Damaris noticed it the next day and asked me if everything was okay. I told her about Catalina and she stared at me. "Jose," she said to me with a serious look, "do you really think she regrets what she did, or is she doing it because she now sees that you are successful? If she really loved you, she would never have left you. It's not your problem anymore. What matters now is that you have achieved what you wanted. If she is not willing to accept that, then she does not deserve you." My sister's words echoed in my mind. It was so true. Catalina didn't love me enough to stay when everything seemed lost. And now, when things were better, she sought me out, as if the time and pain she caused me didn't matter. I decided not to answer him anymore. Weeks passed, and my channel continued to grow. It had reached numbers I never imagined. I started receiving invitations from brands, collaborating with other creators, and finally, I felt like I was achieving the recognition I so desired. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The real change wasn't the money or the followers. What really changed was the way I looked at things. I realized that it wasn't about being successful to prove something to someone, but about doing it for myself. And that realization was what finally set me free. And while all this was happening, one day I received an unexpected message. It was from Catalina. "Jose, don't hate me. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I've seen your achievements, and the truth is, I let you go too late. I was wrong." That message was the last time I heard from her. After that, I didn't care anymore. She was gone, and now, even if I tried to get back, I didn't need her anymore. I had found my own path, one that didn't require her approval or anyone else. Damaris, my sister, became my main source of support. She was the one who always believed in me when no one else did. And to her, my little sister who kept me going when the world seemed to be against me, is the one I owe everything. Without her, I wouldn't have made it this far. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if things had been different, if Catalina had never left me, if my family had been more understanding. But in the end, I realized that life has its own paths and that everything that happened was what made me who I am today. And now, looking back, I can say with certainty that although it was a path full of pain and sacrifice, it was also the one that led me to find my true strength. The success of my channel was something I didn't expect, but at the same time, I craved it with all my might. As things started to look up, I started to feel a strange pressure on my shoulders. It wasn't just about my dreams anymore, but about people's expectations of me. The weight of digital fame started to affect me in ways I didn't understand. Every time I uploaded a video, I felt watched, criticized. Social media became a minefield. For every supportive comment, there were 10 criticisms and mockery. But the worst thing of all wasn't the external pressure. It was the growing distance between me and my mother. She, who had been so worried about my future at the beginning, seemed more distant than ever now. She worried about what might happen if the world of YouTube suddenly disappeared. "Jose, what are you going to do when this is all over? What if you can't make a living from this anymore? You need to have a plan B, a real job." Her concern, though it came from a place of love, frustrated me. Gone was the young dreamer who had asked for her support in the beginning. Now she saw only a man who, according to her, was losing his way. And the worst thing was that I couldn't convince her otherwise. Nothing I said or did seemed to be enough. That's when I felt more alone than ever. One night, after an argument with my mother, I realized that Catalina had stopped texting me. She seemed to have faded away again, only now I didn't care. Or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. However, a part of me still felt an open wound. After everything I had been through, the last thing thing I expected was to fall into the trap of false promises again. But one message changed everything. This time it wasn't from Catalina, but from an old friend from college. Andres, a guy with whom I shared many of my aspirations in those days, wrote to me. His message read, "Jose, I know we've lost touch, but I have something that might interest you. I'm working on a great opportunity for content creators like you. I know you've been through a lot of hardships, but I think this could be a turning point for you." My mind started to run in circles. I thought about what such an opportunity could mean. My first impulse was to investigate, but the feeling that it could all be just another missed opportunity made me hesitate. However, Andres was one of the few people who had believed in me, even when no one else did. I decided to give him a chance. I agreed to meet him. What I discovered that night changed my perspective completely. Not only did Andres offer me a collaboration, he also introduced me to a group of investors interested in funding projects by emerging YouTubers. The amount of money involved was enough to change my life, but what struck me more was the vision of these investors. They believed in me, not just in my numbers, but in what I stood for as a person. They offered me a contract that would guarantee the production of high-quality content, promotion, and most importantly, financial stability. However, there was one clause that baffled me. The clause said that I had to abandon my roots, change my style to suit a wider audience, modify my content to do what would sell. And that made me question everything I had done up until then. That night, as I was thinking about the offer, I received another text. This time it was from Damaris, my little sister. "Jose, I saw what they offered you, but I want you to think carefully before you accept. If you are happy with what you do, don't change just for money. Don't let success make you lose sight of what really matters to you." Damaris's words hit me hard. She had seen all the effort, sacrifice, and pain I had gone through, but at the same time, she saw what I was about to lose. This success, this new world, could change me forever, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. The next morning, I decided to talk to my mother. I was tired of feeling unsupported, but I also understood her concern. I told her about the offer and what I felt in my heart. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read at first, but then she said something that made me think deeply. "Jose, when I saw you pursue this dream, I didn't care if you failed or if you won. What mattered to me was that you tried. Now that you've come this far, I don't want you to change just for money. But if you decide to follow this path, make sure you do it for yourself, not for what others expect of you." That conversation with my mother changed something inside me. It was no longer about meeting other people's expectations. It was no longer about proving to Catalina that I was wrong or proving to anyone that I was capable. It was about being true to myself, about following my dream without losing my essence. Ultimately, I turned down the investor's offer. I decided to follow my own path, one that, although uncertain, was the one that made me feel most fulfilled. However, what he didn't know was that the real challenge was yet to come. The weeks after I turned down the investor's offer were the hardest of my life. My channel's numbers started to decline. At first, everything looked promising, but soon the pressure started to mount. The negative comments grew, sponsors walked away, and what hurt me the most, people started to question my decision to not accept the money. My videos were no longer generating the same impact as before. People were used to seeing easy-to-consume content, something that entertained them without going into too much depth, and I had refused to fall into that kind of dynamic. Even though I knew my decision was the right one, the fear of losing everything I had worked so hard for kept me up at night. Catalina, after a long silence, wrote to me. This time, they weren't sweet words or empty promises. Her message was full of reproaches, of frustration. "I told you that you weren't going to make it, Jose. Now you see? Now no one supports you. What's the point of having dreams if you can't even support yourself? I can't be with someone who lives in fantasies anymore." Reading those words was like a stab in the chest. Every part of me wanted to react, to scream, to defend myself, but something inside me told me that it was too late to save that relationship. Catalina had never understood the sacrifice that following a dream entailed. It was always easier for her to complain about what she didn't have than to appreciate what I was trying to build. One night, while I was editing another video, not knowing if it would be my last, I got a call. It was Damaris. "Jose, I know things aren't going well, but you have to know that you're not alone. I'll always be here, supporting you, even if the world turns its back on you." Her words were a balm for my soul, but they couldn't soothe the weight I felt in my heart. Through it all, she was still the only person who truly saw me, who understood what I was going through. Her unconditional support made me feel that perhaps it was worth continuing to fight. But then, something unexpected happened. I received a private message from an anonymous follower on social media. The message read as follows: "I've been following your channel for a long time. I've seen your growth and I've seen how you've stayed true to your principles, even when everything has gone wrong. I want to offer you a chance. If you accept, I'll make you a contract with conditions that won't commit you, but will help you grow. I don't want you to change who you are. I just want you to keep being you. I didn't know what to think. This message was completely different from anything I had ever received before. But what struck me most was the signature at the end. I am someone who believes in what you do, Jose. I am waiting for you. Curiosity consumed me. Who was behind that message? And how could I trust such an ambiguous offer? I decided to investigate, but I couldn't find anything about that person. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. The fear of falling into another trap paralyzed me, but the hope that this could be my chance drove me to investigate further. What I didn't know at the time was that this new offer would lead me to a situation that would change my life forever. After much thought, I decided to accept the offer. I didn't know who was behind that message, but I felt that I couldn't pass up such a mysterious opportunity. I contacted the person and was offered a meeting at a cafe in a quiet part of the city. I arrived nervously, not knowing what to expect, and when I saw the person waiting for me, I froze. It was Catherine. Couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, she was the person behind the offer. But not only that, her face didn't reflect anger or frustration. There was something different about her. When she saw me, she stood up from her seat and motioned for me to sit down. Jose, I know this may sound weird, but listen, it wasn't right, I know. I got carried away by my own fears and I never understood what all this meant to you. I've been watching and I saw how every single one of your efforts fell apart because you didn't take the opportunity that was offered to you before. But now that I see it, the problem wasn't what you did, but how you did it. And I was the one who pushed you to give up on what made you happy. Catalina's words struck me, but it wasn't just the apology that surprised me, but the offer she made me afterwards. I want you to be yourself, Jose, and I'm willing to help you achieve that. I've been working behind the scenes with some contacts, and I've managed to get your channel promoted worldwide. But this is your last attempt. If you reject it, I promise there won't be another one. I was in shock. Catalina, the same person who had left me when I needed her the most, was now offering me an opportunity that many would have dreamed of receiving. Could I trust her again? Doubt was gnawing at me, but in the end, I knew this wasn't just a matter of love or past relationships. It was my life. I had to make a decision. Without thinking twice, I accepted his help, and everything changed. Over the next few months, my channel grew beyond what I could have ever imagined. Videos that once barely reached a few thousand views were now reaching millions. Sponsors who had previously ignored me now wanted to work with me. And best of all, my sister Damaris, who had always been by my side, saw my efforts finally pay off. She not only celebrated my successes, but also helped me stay calm and stay true to what I truly stood for. Catalina, for her part, kept her promise. Although the relationship with her was never the same, we found ourselves in a different place, a place where friendship and respect prevailed over everything else. Finally, a year later, I received a letter from the same investors who had offered me to change my style in the past. This time, it was not an offer of easy money. It was a recognition of everything I had achieved on my own, without giving up, without giving in to the pressures of the outside world. They offered me a contract, but this time the conditions were clear. They wanted me to remain the same Jose who had started from scratch. That day, looking at my channel full of followers and remembering all the times I had fallen and gotten back up, I knew I had made it. Not only had I achieved my dream, but I had done it my way. I never let circumstances or people define who I was. And in the end, that was the real victory. I never imagined I would have to sell my soul to save my son. My fight to give him a better future. My name is Ernesto, and I am a construction worker. I live in a low-class neighborhood where life has never been easy. My salary is not much, but I have always worked with dignity. I have a son, Juanito, who is 6 years old, who is my reason for being. My life has always revolved around him, his smile, his contagious laugh. But everything changed one day. It was an ordinary afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary, when Juanito complained of a pain in his stomach. At first, I thought it was just something temporary, but when he didn't get better, I took him to the hospital. The news we got that night changed my life forever. My son had a rare disease, one that required an urgent operation, and worst of all, it cost more than I could earn in my entire life. The doctor told me that if we didn't get the money for the operation, Juanito wouldn't survive. I felt like the ground had fallen out from under my feet. I looked at my son, so fragile, so vulnerable, and all I could do was promise him that I would save him, even though I had no idea how. I had no idea where to get all that money. Banks wouldn't give me a loan, I had no property to sell, and my friends, well, most of my acquaintances are living the same life as me, struggling to survive. But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I started working longer hours in construction until my body couldn't take it anymore. Monday through Saturday, I was on the construction site, putting up walls, digging, mixing cement. I didn't care what they asked me to do, I just thought about how to get that money together. But as time went on, I started started to realize something painful. Even though I worked tirelessly, the money I was making was nowhere near enough. So I started trying things I would never have considered. The first attempt was to borrow money from moneylenders, but with the high interest rates, I knew I would never be able to pay it back. The second attempt was to sell some of the few things I had, my old truck, some work tools I had accumulated over the years, but all of that only gave me a fraction of what I needed. The days passed and desperation began to take hold of me. That's when I heard about an online job. It involved making deliveries for an app, something I had of course never considered. I had no background in anything tech-related, but I thought, why not? So after my shifts at the construction site, I started making deliveries around the city. I know every inch of the place, so I thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. I would spend hours and hours, sometimes all night, delivering packages in the hopes of earning a little extra. The money I was making was pittance, but like I said, I couldn't give up. My son depended on me, so I kept going. I worked construction, then I delivered packages, and at night, when my body couldn't take it anymore, I'd take whatever job I could find. Washing cars, selling goods on the street, whatever. One night, after a tiring day at work, I met a guy who offered me a deal I never imagined. He told me I could make a lot of money fast if I joined a small business that had to do with online gambling. My instinct was to turn him down, but desperation blinded me. I saw in his eyes the promise of what I needed, the money to save my son. So, without thinking too much, I accepted. What I didn't know was that this dark world of gambling would drag me down much faster than I imagined. I lost the little I had, and in the process, I found myself in a spiral of guilt and shame. Not only was I losing money, but I was also losing my dignity. However, every time I thought about my son, I told myself that I had to keep fighting. The night everything changed, I found myself on the street, not knowing where to go. My body was no longer responding, my hands were shaking from exhaustion, but something was pushing me to keep going. That's when I received the call I had been dreading. The doctor told me that Juanito's condition had worsened. If we don't get the operation soon, we'll lose the battle. My world had come crashing down on me. Everything I had done up until that point had been in vain. I felt like I had failed as a parent. The weight of despair nearly overwhelmed me. But then, something happened that I would never forget. That same night, as I was aimlessly walking through the streets, I saw a man holding a sign asking for help. I approached him, and as I read what he said, I understood that I was not alone in my struggle. The sign read, "Help for my son. I am a worker, and I am fighting to save him." It was as if fate was telling me something. This man was going through the same thing as me. His son needed help, but unlike me, he had not lost hope. I looked at him, and all I could do was walk over and give him what little I had left. But when he thanked me, he gave me something that changed everything. "You are not alone, brother. There is a community here that supports you. Don't let your struggle be in vain." That man, with his sign, left me speechless. His gratitude was not something I expected, but when he said those encouraging words, I felt like someone finally understood me. How many times had I felt alone in this process? All this time, all I heard was criticism, mockery, and empty advice from people who didn't know what it was like to be on the verge of losing everything. No one understood me, but in that moment, that man offered me something more valuable than money: hope. I returned home that night, but my head was still spinning. On the one hand, I felt more tired than ever, but on the other, the small spark of hope that had been ignited by the encounter with that man began to grow. When I got home, I found my wife, Marta. She looked tired and exhausted by the situation, but she was still waiting for me with the best possible face. Juanito was sleeping in his bed, with his face pale and his eyes closed, but I knew there wasn't much time. I sat down next to Marta, and the words came out of me on impulse. "What would you do if you could get all the money we needed? If we didn't have to worry about anything anymore?" She stared at me, as if she didn't understand what I was saying. "How would you do it, Ernesto? Where are you going to get all that money? We've tried everything." Her voice was filled with frustration, and I don't blame her. I felt that way too. But what Marta didn't know was that I was willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant losing myself in the process. That same night, I decided to do something I would never have considered before. I reached out for help on social media. The idea of telling my story, of being vulnerable in front of strangers, terrified me. What would people say? Would they make fun of me? Would they call me a failure? But I had no other choice. I wrote a short but heartfelt post. "I'm a construction worker, and my son needs an urgent operation. I don't know how to get all the money, but I'm fighting with everything I have. If anyone has an idea or can help, please message me. I'm willing to do anything." I posted it at 2 a.m., expecting only a few people to see it. But to my surprise, the response was overwhelming. Dozens of people started commenting, some offering money, others suggestions, and some even sharing their own stories of struggle. Suddenly, I felt accompanied, supported by a community I didn't even know. The next day, day, I woke up with more energy than ever. I didn't know how, but I felt like destiny was guiding me. I knew I had to keep fighting, so I decided to make one last attempt, something I had never considered before, starting a small home repair and maintenance business. It wasn't much, but it could be the opportunity one had been looking for. I spoke to my friend Luis, who had some experience in the area. He was willing to help me get the necessary tools, and despite the doubt on his face, he gave me the support I needed. With little money and a lot of effort, I began to repair roofs, doors, and do small renovation. The first jobs were hard, but each client recommended me to another, and things began to improve little by little. All this time, Marta was still worried, but she didn't give up hope. She had been the one who suffered the most, and even though she was tired, she never said a single word of reproach to me. Even when I saw her crying at night, alone, while looking at Juanito, I felt a great helplessness. I couldn't make all this disappear overnight, but I promised that I would. As the days passed, the small business began to prosper, although not enough to cover Juanito's operation. However, I began to realize something important. What I had learned along the way was not just about making money. It was about the strength it takes to keep going when all seems lost. There were days when despair would take over. I remember one particularly difficult afternoon when the mechanic told me that my truck, the one I used to carry my tools, was broken and could not be fixed. Without that truck, I would not be able to work, and without work, there would be no way to continue fighting for my son's operation. At that moment, I felt like my world was falling apart. I could only think of one thing: how am I going to make my son understand that I fought for him if I am not able to save him? The next day, when I saw no way out, something unexpected happened. The owner of an auto parts store, whom I had asked for help, offered me an old pickup truck. It was in bad shape, but good enough for me to continue working. "I'm giving it to you," he said, "because I know you won't give up." You know what's most amazing about all of this? Despite the falls, the blows, and the times I was on the verge of throwing in the towel, something kept pushing me. It was when, at the end of a long day, I saw my son smiling, that smile that had never stopped motivating me, that I understood the most important thing of all. No matter how long it took me, no matter how much I had to suffer, the only thing that really mattered was that I couldn't give up. Not just for me, but for him. Every day, I woke up with more desire to continue, but also with more weight on my shoulders. The work did not stop, the hours seemed endless, and the worry about Juanito's operation consumed me. At first, the old truck helped me keep going, but it was not long before it started to cause me more problems. One day, while I was going to do some work on a house, it suddenly stopped in the middle of the road. The tires screeched, the engine sounded like it was protesting, and worst of all, I had no money to repair it. Still, all I could do was keep pushing, looking for ways to keep going. That's when something completely unexpected happened. I was at a gas station, almost on the verge of despair, when a stranger approached me. "Are you Ernesto, the one fighting for his son?" he asked me. I looked at him, confused. How did he know my name? Who was this man? "I'm Pedro, an old acquaintance of your dad's. I've seen your story on the networks and I couldn't keep quiet," he said. It turns out that Pedro, like many others, had seen my post on the internet, but had been more than a spectator. The man began offering me advice, telling me that he knew some people in the industry and that he might be able to help me get a loan to repair the truck. Although I felt it was too good to be true, he offered me his card, and I, with no other option, decided to trust him. In the days that followed, Pedro became a mentor of sorts to me. Not only did he help me with the truck, but he also gave me a number of contacts for new jobs. One of those jobs involved doing repairs for a fairly large construction company. The pay wasn't incredible, but it allowed me to advance a bit further. However, everything started to fall apart again when my youngest daughter, Sophia, got sick. Suddenly, the worry for my son Juanito doubled. Sophia started with a high fever, and the doctors said it was nothing serious, but I couldn't stop thinking that all this was a sign that something bad was coming. My days were consumed by work, and my nights by endless hospital visits for Juanito and Sophia. I couldn't believe that the weight of everything I was going through kept me from breathing, but the worst was yet to come. One afternoon, while fixing a leak in the roof of a house, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was the hospital nurse. "Mr. Ernesto, there is a problem with your son's operation. We need the money immediately, otherwise we cannot proceed." My world fell apart at that moment. I had been sacrificing so much, working myself to exhaustion, and now the operation was in jeopardy. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't pay what they were asking me. I called Marta, my wife, desperate, but when I heard her voice full of frustration, I knew that I was also at my limit. I had nothing left. That's when I saw a message on my phone. It was Peter. "I have an offer for you, but it's risky. Are you willing to do it?" My head was in a mess, but I had no other option. I agreed to talk to him. Pedro explained to me that there was an opportunity to make an investment in a construction project. The idea was to get quick money money through a scheme that involved risk but could work. The problem was that to get into the business, I had to put up everything I had gotten so far, including the truck. My mind couldn't think straight, but what worried me most was that Marta would find out. If I told her what I was going to do, she would most likely go crazy and reject it. It had happened to me before, and I didn't want desperation to drive us even further apart. But I made an impulsive decision. I took everything I had and invested it in this project. It was the riskiest thing I had ever done in my life, but I couldn't wait any longer. My son needed this operation, and if this worked, I could get it. Within a few days, things started to pay off. The investments he had made began to generate profit. It was as if everything he had been struggling for so long was finally starting to pay off. Juanito's operation was within reach, and the future, though uncertain, finally looked bright. But just when everything seemed to be taking shape, something changed. It was as if the universe wanted to test me once again. Days filled with mixed emotions passed. Every time I received an update on the progress of the project, the knot in my stomach tightened more. But the money kept coming in, and I couldn't ignore that I was closer to what I had always dreamed of. I could finally give Juanito what he needed. However, not everything in my life could go right at the same time. One afternoon, while I was working on the play, Marta called me. Her voice sounded different, colder than ever. "Ernesto, we need to talk," he said in a serious tone. My heart skipped a beat. I knew something wasn't right, and when I got home that night, I saw her there, her face streaked with tears. I sat down next to her, but before I could say anything, she burst into tears. "I don't know how we got here," she told me, "but I can't take it anymore. I can't take your lies, your empty promises. I can't live like this anymore." At first, I didn't understand. "What lies, Marta? I've been struggling. I've done everything I can to make this work. My son needs an operation. Please understand." But Marta looked me straight in the eye and told me the truth I never wanted to hear. "You're not the man I knew anymore. This isn't you. And now you've gotten yourself into something you don't understand. I'm afraid this project, everything you're doing, will drag you down further. I can't be around someone who puts everything on the line and forgets what really mattered." It was like a blow to the heart. Somehow, I knew he was right. I had become so obsessed with getting the money, with giving my son a chance, that I had forgotten about the people who mattered most. And at the same time, I was blinded by desperation. I wanted to save Juanito, but without realizing it, I was destroying the thing I loved most. That night, Marta decided to leave. She told me she needed time, that she couldn't continue to be by my side with all the decisions I was making. I saw her leaving with Sophia, and the weight of my failure crushed me completely. How could I keep fighting when everything was falling apart around me? How could I look at my children and tell them that it was all worth it when the only person who believed in me, my wife, was no longer there? Weeks passed in which guilt and pain tore me apart. But despite the storm that had broken out in my life, there was one thing that wouldn't let me give up: Juanito. He didn't know anything about what was happening. For him, everything was still a hope, a dream that his dad would save him. And that was the only thing that kept me going. That's when Pedro, the man who had helped me, called me. He told me that the business was about to fall apart. The project that had promised so much was on the verge of collapse due to other people's mistakes. And if I didn't act quickly, I would lose everything. "Ernesto, if you don't do something now, everything you've done up until now is going to go down the drain. You decide whether you're going to stand there watching everything fall apart or whether you're going to face this with everything you've got. You only have one shot," Pedro told me. At that moment, I realized what was really at stake. Not just my family, not just my future, but my son's life. I had to make a radical decision. I decided I couldn't just stand by and watch everything fall apart. It wasn't just about money or business. It was my family. It was my son's life. I had to risk everything I had achieved up to that point. I spoke to Pedro and explained that we were going to invest everything that was left, the little that I had managed to save, in one last play. It was going to be all or nothing. I threw myself into the project and, like never before, I felt more alive, more focused, more determined. The following weeks were chaos. The pressures were mounting. Juanito's operation was becoming more expensive every day, and the money I had invested in the business seemed to evaporate rapidly. The people who had trusted me were beginning to doubt, but I couldn't give up. Couldn't let it all be in vain. One night, while I was working on the project, the phone rang. It was Marta. Her voice sounded distant, but I decided to answer. "Ernesto, I'm so sorry. I want to talk to you," he said, and my heart raced. She explained that she had been thinking a lot about everything that had happened. She said she had realized that I hadn't changed. I was just trying to give them the best, albeit in the wrong way. Marta had made a mistake by walking away so quickly, but she had also been scared. The future was uncertain, but the only thing that mattered was that we were together. That conversation was the first step in healing what had been broken. It wasn't going to be easy, but I decided that now was the time to change. Not just for me, but for her for Juanito, for our family. Somehow, Marta forgave me. I knew that not all was lost, and over time, we began to rebuild what we had lost. Meanwhile, the construction business began to bear fruit. As the days passed, small investments began to yield results. Pedro and I worked tirelessly, and little by little, the profits began to grow. But the most surprising thing was when I managed to get the operation for Juanito. I couldn't believe it, but finally, after so many sacrifices, my son had the opportunity he needed to save his life. The night before the operation, I found myself watching Juanito as he slept. I stroked his head and whispered, "It was all worth it, son. Everything I did was for you." At that moment, I felt like my soul was at peace. Even though the road had been long and painful, I knew I was doing the right thing. The next day, the operation was a success. Juanito made an amazing recovery, and I finally felt as if I had accomplished the impossible. Despite the difficulties, despite the sleepless nights, despite the criticism and the losses, I had overcome it all. Months later, the business was thriving. Marta and I were back together, and although the road was difficult, I understood that the moments of despair had been the key to achieving what really mattered, my family. And the most incredible thing of all was that the effort of a lifetime had not only saved my son, but had saved our family. I realized that sometimes the greatest sacrifice is not what you believe, but how you face the obstacles. I never stopped fighting, and that, in the end, was what allowed us to win. I lost everything because of my brother's envy, but I managed to overcome adversity, and now I am unstoppable. These are the kinds of stories I never thought I would experience. All my life, I believed that the people who loved me the most would be the ones who would support me when things got tough. But it turned out that the envy, greed, and ego of those I loved the most ended up destroying everything my father and I had built. My name is Luis. Since I was a little boy, I grew up in a small furniture manufacturing company that my father started. He taught me everything about the business, how to grow a small idea, how to fight when things got tough, and how to be a man of honor. My mother had died when I was very young, and my father was the only one who showed me the value of things. We worked very hard to get the company going, and over time, it became one of the most respected in our city. Growing up, everything seemed to be on track for me. My sister Clara and brother Andres were always around, but as the years went by, something strange started to happen. They wanted more. They knew that one day the company was going to be mine, that everything my father had done would be to secure a future for me. But what I didn't count on was that my brother and sister would start to want my place. I never imagined that they would be capable of such a low thing. My father died suddenly when he was 60 years old. It was a very hard blow, the worst of all, but I promised myself that I would continue his legacy and that I would not let his effort be lost. The last thing he said to me was, "Son, keep the family together. It is the most important thing you have." I, with all the pain in the world, tried to do my best to continue. However, problems began to become inevitable. My brother Andres, the youngest, was always a man of quick and ambitious ideas, but he lacked the humility that my father instilled in me. He always thought that I was not qualified to run the business, that his mind was more brilliant, and that I was too attached to my father's legacy. My sister Clara, on the other hand, began to feel that she had as much right as I to lead, despite not having been as involved in the company. They began to murmur among themselves, and tensions rose. One night after a family meeting, I realized something was wrong. I received a call from a lawyer for the company. "Luis, we need to talk. There's something you need to know," he said. As I sat in the office, my heart was pounding. Apparently, my own brothers had manipulated documents, created fake agreements, and, in a clever move, stripped me of my company. Everything we had built had slipped through their fingers, and I was left out in the cold. I remember perfectly how I felt. It was as if the earth had opened up beneath my feet. Everything I had done, all the effort, crumbled in a matter of days. The worst of all was not only that they had taken away what my father had left me, but they had done it with a smile on their faces. My own brothers, those I had trusted blindly, had betrayed me. But at that moment, something inside me changed. I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. I had learned too much from my father, and even though they had left me with nothing, I knew I could rebuild my life. No money, no connections, but with the determination of someone who has hit rock bottom and isn't going to give up. All I had was my intelligence, my knowledge, and a deep desire to prove to them that I was above their betrayal. So I started from scratch. I had no other choice. I sold the little I had left of value, a couple of my father's mementos and some personal things, and used that money to invest in the only thing I knew how to do, furniture. I started making my own designs and selling them to small local shops. It was hard, but my passion for what I did kept me focused. I had nothing else, but every piece I created was a reminder of what I had lost and what I could still achieve. As time went on, my small business grew, not at the speed it had grown before, but I was moving forward. Every day, I was faced with bigger challenges, but I never gave up. I knew that my skill and work ethic would eventually take me far. Word of mouth helped me more than I ever imagined. People began to trust me, my designs, and the effort I put into each piece of furniture I created. With each passing day, I saw my efforts begin to bear fruit. At first, the days were long, the nights even lonelier. Sometimes, I would wake up at 3 a.m. with my hands numb from work, my head full of doubts, but with a determination so strong that I couldn't give up. I began hiring people to help me, and although I couldn't offer them much money, they saw what I saw, the potential for something big. My little shop began to grow, and somehow, I was finding peace again, a peace that my brothers, in their desperate jealousy, didn't seem to understand. At first, what hurt me the most was the attitude of my own friends. Some, without saying it openly, treated me as if I was wasting my time. Why don't you give up, Luis? What you have now is just a small workshop. Are you really going to keep fighting for something that no longer makes sense? The people who had been close to me, who had seen my effort and my sacrifices, did not understand why I persisted. They could not see what I saw, an opportunity to prove that I had not only inherited my father's business, but that I could do it better, much better, without my brother's betrayal. My friends told me I was a fool, that my brother Andres and my sister Clara already owned the company, that it was clear that they had the last word, that I had already lost. But something inside me told me that it wasn't the end. My heart was still beating as hard as when my father taught me to build furniture. I wasn't going to let his lies bring me down. The worst came when, after several months of hard work, my brothers began to publicly mock me. They knew that my small company was growing, and instead of respecting my efforts, they dedicated themselves to minimizing what I was achieving. Clara, my sister, began to speak badly about me to everyone she knew, claiming that I did not have the capacity to manage a larger company, that my products were inferior, that my work was only a cheap copy of what it once was. I remember the day when, during a family gathering, Andres, my brother, with his usual arrogance, told me, "You will never be anything more than a failed attempt, Luis. You will see. We are already where we want to be, and you, no matter how hard you try, will never be able to catch up with us." Those words hurt me more than anything else, not just because they came from my own brother, but because it made me think that maybe I was destined to fail. But you know what? It was that very night that I decided that I would never let their lies rule me again. Something changed in me. I wasn't going to be the loser they thought they had made me into. I started doing more than just selling furniture. I started expanding my line, innovating, looking for ways to differentiate myself, to create pieces that no one else had. I talked to architects, interior designers, looking for collaborations with other small businesses. I refused to stay in my comfort zone. The memories of my father, of his passion for what he did, were my fuel. I started gaining notoriety, not for the money, but for the quality of what I was offering. At first, it was just a handful of supportive customers, but little by little, more and more people started to see what I was building. Comments that were once mocking turned into silent respect. People started talking about me, and my little workshop became recognized as a place where the passion for handwork was felt in every corner. I wasn't just selling furniture. I was selling a piece of me, a piece of what my life had been like. That's what people bought. My brothers, seeing the growth I was having, became more furious. They tried to sabotage me in many ways, bad-mouthing me in the industry, manipulating clients into not buying from me, slandering my name. They couldn't stand that someone they considered inferior was gaining respect, and people began to listen, to see through their lies. What they didn't know was that the more they tried to bring me down, the stronger I became. Each attack only motivated me more. Each word of contempt was a reminder of what I had been and what I could become. The hard work I was putting in began to pay off. My clients began to come back and recommend me to others. Something that at first seemed impossible began to become a reality. I no longer had just a shop. I had a business that was growing. Sure, it was nowhere near what my father's company had been, but I no longer cared about that. Now, my priority was to get back on my feet, to show my brothers that I didn't need them or their jealousy to succeed. One day, after working for 16 hours straight, I got a message. It was from a well-known architect in the sector. He had heard me through the voice of his clients, those who recommended me for the quality of my product. He asked me for a meeting to discuss a possible collaboration. It was the opportunity one had been waiting for. Without hesitation, I accepted, and the next day I was in his office. When I arrived, I saw a place full of large projects, luxurious designs, and everything seemed so far from my reality. But at the same time, I felt something inside me. I knew I could be a part of it. During the meeting, the architect told me something that left me speechless. Luis, there is something special about your designs. There is a soul in what you do that others don't have. I want you on this project. I want you to be the one in charge of all the custom furniture. My eyes lit up. This was the job that could put me on the map. A contract with this architect meant being able to scale my business in ways I never imagined. What I didn't expect, however, was that during that very meeting, the architect mentioned my brothers to me. It turns out that my brothers had tried to get in touch with him before, hoping to get the same job. They tried to belittle my name, badmouth my shop, convinced that they could crush me and take it all for themselves. But here I was, sitting in front of him, listening to his words, with a smile on my face. And best of all, he chose me. Somehow, my brothers began to realize that everything they had done to try to destroy me had failed. They, with all the money and resources they had, could not destroy the trust one had been building little by little, piece by piece, client by client. People trusted me, not their lies. My brothers didn't take it well. Andres at first called me to ask for a meeting. He had been so upset that someone with nothing could have what he thought only he deserved. He accused me of stealing their business, of betraying my father's memory. Clara, on the other hand, didn't even try to hide her frustration. We knew it, Luis. We knew you were going to do well, but not like this. We thought you were a fool. We thought you were going to fail, but what we didn't understand is that people follow those who have something real to offer, not those who are just imitators. Now you've become a threat, and I don't know if I like it, she told me. Everything they had said to me, all their hurtful words, pierced me like a sword, but this time they didn't strike me down. I realized that my real enemy wasn't Andres or Clara. It was the doubt they had planted in me when they told me I would never amount to anything without them. They had tried to make me feel small, but in reality, they were only projecting their own fears and insecurity. One day, while all this was going on, one of my old clients, a lady who had bought some furniture through my workshop, called me. She told me she wanted to help me. Luis, I have contacts, I have the relationships to open doors for you in the international market. And what I like most is that you are not looking to make a quick buck. You are looking to create something that will last. That day, something clicked inside me. I didn't just want to excel locally. I wanted to be big. I wanted to expand my business beyond what my brothers ever imagined. And so a new stage in my life began. The first international collaboration came, and with it, more recognition. What was once a small workshop in a forgotten corner of the city was now a household name. The phone never stopped ringing, and every time I had to turn down a project due to lack of time, I felt closer and closer to what I had dreamed of. My brothers started following me on social media, watching me from afar. They sent me messages, trying to show goodwill, but it was too late. I didn't need them anymore. As my business grew, things began to change in surprising ways. Every satisfied customer became a small step towards rebuilding what had once been mine, and best of all, without having to depend on anyone. But the memories of everything I had been through, of all the times I felt less than, of all the humiliation I had received from my own siblings, were still there. Every time I looked at the messages of support from my customers, every time I saw my workshop fill up with international orders, I felt a mix of anger and pride. Anger at what they put me through, but pride in knowing that I had achieved the unthinkable, no matter the obstacles. One day, after one of my meetings with an important client, I decided to give myself a break. I went to a small cafe in the city, a place I used to frequent when I had nothing. When I walked in, the atmosphere was relaxed, with soft music playing in the background. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window. As I watched the hustle and bustle of the street, I felt something in my chest, as if everything I had fought to achieve, everything I had overcome, had led me to that exact moment. Sometimes life throws you into the abyss only for you to find your true strength in the fall. It wasn't long before I was recognized. An older man approached my table with a smile he couldn't hide. Luis, right? I've seen you on the network. What a great job you're doing. Everyone is talking about you. I congratulate you, seriously. That conversation was brief, but it left me with a strange feeling in my heart. At that moment, I understood how far I had come, not only professionally, but as a person. My life had taken a 180-degree turn, and people no longer saw me as the younger brother, the one who was worthless, the one who was always below everyone. Now, they saw me as someone with strength, someone who did not let himself be dragged down by betrayal, envy, or evil. The following week, I got a text from Clara. To be honest, I didn't want to read it, but something compelled me to. Luis, I want to talk to you. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I think I need to apologize, not just for what I did, but for how I treated you. I thought you were never never going to amount to anything, but I was wrong. I admire you, and I'm deeply sorry for what we did. I hope that one day you can forgive us." I couldn't help but smile a little as I read their words, not because I thought I needed their forgiveness, but because at that moment I understood something fundamental. Forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. I was the one who had to free myself from the weight of envy, of rage, of everything that had hurt me. I couldn't carry that bitterness if I wanted to continue growing, but I was also aware that things would never be the same again. The damage had already been done. I couldn't just forget how I was treated, how I was abandoned at the most difficult time of my life. What had happened couldn't be erased, but I could decide what to do with the future. Time passed, and my business not only held up, but expanded even further. As I grew, I felt like every step brought me closer to what I always dreamed of. It was no longer just about revenge or proving something to my brother. It was about making everything I always imagined a reality as I sat in my father's workshop, watching him work, dreaming of being like him one day. Now, I wasn't just like him. I was surpassing everything he had ever accomplished, and I was doing it in a unique way. The phone rang one afternoon, interrupting my thoughts. It was the architect who had worked with me months before. "Luis, I'm calling about something important. I want you to take charge of all the custom furniture for a large project. The contract is yours if you choose to accept it. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." That call was the push I needed to take an even bigger leap. My life was no longer the same. I was now the master of my own destiny. My workshop became a renowned company, and my brothers, well, they continued to live in the shadow of their own arrogance. Because even though they tried to destroy me, they didn't succeed. Life taught me something important. Never underestimate the strength of someone who has nothing to lose, but everything to gain. As the months went by, my company's business continued to grow by leaps and bounds. My days were filled with meetings with important clients, and the feeling of success was increasingly palpable. My phone never stopped ringing, and requests for new projects kept coming. First, it seemed incredible to me. How had I gotten to this point after everything I had been through? I had been on the verge of despair, but today I was at the head of a company with a bright future. What struck me most was not the money, nor the million-dollar contract, but the way people began to see me. The respect that I had previously lacked was now given to me in abundance. I had been underestimated, but instead of being brought down, it had driven me to keep fighting. Now, I saw that everything I had done had been worth it, but not everything was so simple. There was something in my heart that I couldn't let go of, something that kept tormenting me, and that was my relationship with my brother. Even though I was achieving a lot, the weight of what they had done to me was still there, like a shadow that didn't let me be completely happy. One day, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Clara, my sister. "Luis, please, we need to talk. I feel terrible about what happened. I want us to sit down and talk, not as brothers and sister, but as adults. What we did was horrible, and I am sorry. I am sorry I failed you." First, I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since they betrayed me, since they left me on the street, that I had learned to live without them. I had built my life on my own effort, but something in my heart told me that maybe it was time to close that chapter. Maybe it was time to forgive, but only if they proved that they really deserved it. I accepted the invitation to meet. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the restaurant nervously. The conversation was about to happen, and I didn't know how to react. When I saw Clara walk in, I realized that time hadn't changed at all. She was still the same, but I was no longer the same. I had transformed into someone who no longer depended on anyone to be happy. At least that's what I thought. "Luis, I know this won't solve everything, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. I, along with Ricardo, hurt you a lot, and I realize now how wrong we were. We treated you as if you were less than us, and you were never less than any of us. We failed you, and I am here to ask for your forgiveness," Clara said with a broken voice. Hearing her words made me feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time: vulnerability, but also a great satisfaction in knowing that I had done the right thing by following my path and not letting myself be destroyed. "Clara, what you did to me hurt me more than you can imagine, but what hurts me the most is that you never believed in me. No one did, but you know what? I did it. I did it all without you, and now I'm stronger than before. I don't want or need you to ask me for forgiveness because I forgave you a long time ago. What I did it for me, not for you. And now, I'm here for me, not for anyone else," I answered with a calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. Clara looked me in the eyes, a mix of guilt and relief. She knew her words couldn't erase all the hurt, but at least she had done the right thing by admitting it. Then my brother Ricardo called me. He wanted to talk to me. His tone was more serious than usual. I knew that what he was going to tell me was not something simple, but I never imagined what came next. "Luis, I've been thinking a lot. I failed you. Sometimes we get carried away by greed, by envy, but I'm tired of living with that. What we did, we did it for money, for control. But after seeing you grow and achieve all this without our help, I realize how wrong I was. And although I know I can't erase the damage, I want you to know that I'm willing to fix my mistakes, Ricardo told me. Although his words weren't enough to erase all the damage they had done to me, I understood that he was also looking for a form of redemption. However, I wasn't about to turn back. I was already over all that, and I wasn't going to let his regret make me doubt what I had accomplished. I was on another level now. My company continued to grow. Every day brought new challenges, but also new satisfaction. I no longer cared if my brothers tried to get back into my life. My life no longer depended on them. The company I had created was mine, and most importantly, I had done everything without expecting anyone to give me anything. The months passed, and my business continued to thrive. Not only had I managed to rebuild my life, but I had also become a role model for other entrepreneurs who, like me, thought they would never make it. My story of resilience became something much bigger than I ever imagined. People now looked at me with respect, and my name began to ring a bell in important business circles. My siblings, Clara and Ricardo, kept trying to get close to me. Clara, more often than Ricardo, insisted that we meet. At each meeting, I saw in her eyes the desperation of wanting to redeem herself, but something in me had changed. I was no longer the man who had been willing to forgive them for their betrayal. Now, I was someone who had found his own path, and I couldn't let those who had turned their backs on me sneak back into my life. The last time we met, Clara looked at me intently, with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Luis, I know there is no turning back now, but I want you to know that I deeply admire you. I never thought you would go this far. And even though our differences won't allow us to be a family again, I want to thank you for everything you taught me. What you did changed my life. I wish you the best, she said. At that moment, something inside me clicked. I remembered the person I used to be, the one who wished everything was different, who wanted her family back. But I also remembered everything I had had to sacrifice to get here. And I realized that I didn't have to keep waiting for them to change or apologize. My life didn't belong to them anymore. With a calm smile, I replied, Clara, I have forgiven you a long time ago, but what all of this has taught me most is that true success does not come from the people around you, but from the peace you find within yourself. And I have already found it. I wish you the best, too, but my life has already moved on without you. Ricardo never dared confront me again. He knew there was nothing he could say to change my mind, and that, in a way, gave me a sense of closure. I had reached a point where the only thing that mattered was what I had built with my own hand. The company continued to grow, and the years passed. Despite everything, I remained true to my principle. I had put revenge and resentment aside. I knew that the most important thing was not money or power, but the satisfaction of knowing that, no matter what life had thrown at me, I had always remained firm in my conviction. And the best part of it all, in the end, was that it hadn't just been a personal triumph. It had transformed the lives of many. My story inspired others to not give up, to keep fighting for what they believe in, no matter what the world tells them. And that was the real victory. Am I the bad guy for wanting to rebuild my life away from my toxic family? I am a civil engineer, and until a couple of years ago, I had a relatively quiet life. I was passionate about my work, I earned enough to support my family, and although we were not rich, we lived comfortably. But everything changed when my father passed away and left as an inheritance a large house, several plots of land, and a small business that he had run for decades. That inheritance, which for many would be a blessing, became my worst nightmare. I have two siblings, Diego, the eldest, and Patricia, the youngest. Neither of them worked. Diego always lived off odd job, although he mostly lived off the women he dated. Patricia, on the other hand, was never interested in studying or working, but always seemed to find a way to have someone else take care of her expenses. The only reason they hadn't completely fallen into the void was my mother, who always defended and justified them, saying that someday they would find their way. Spoiler, they never did. When my father died, I was left to take charge of everything. I was the one who had the knowledge to handle the legal paperwork, taxes, and responsibilities that came with inheritance. First, I didn't complain. I thought it was the right thing to do, but I soon realized that my siblings had no intention of helping. Instead, they started making demands. Diego should keep the house, he's the oldest, my mother would say. Patricia needs land to build her future home, she would add. And me, I just wanted my father's wishes to be respected, as he had left everything divided equally. But I soon realized that, for them, that was not enough. Things started to get tense when Diego moved in with my parents without warning. He claimed it was to take care of mom, but in reality he was just enjoying free housing. Soon after, Patricia did the same. The house that was once my childhood home became a mess. Constant parties, unexpected visitors, and an endless pile of debts piling up in the mailbox. Meanwhile, I continued to work long hours as an engineer to support my wife, Sophia, and our young son, Matthias. But as if supporting my own family wasn't enough, my mother began constantly asking me for money to pay household expenses. "They're your siblings, they're entitled to a little help," she would say. What she really meant was, "You work, they don't, so it's your obligation." One day, my mother called me to a family meeting. I thought it would be to discuss how to handle the inheritance fairly, but I was completely wrong. When I arrived, I found Diego and Patricia sitting there as if they were in court. My mother, in a solemn voice, said, "Your siblings have decided that it would be best to sell Dad's company and divide the money. It's not fair that only you benefit from it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was the only one who had kept the company afloat. I had invested years of effort, sleepless nights, and even my own money to modernize it. But now they wanted to sell it without having contributed a single cent. I tried to reason with them, explaining that the company was our only source of income, but they didn't care. "If you care so much, then buy us out," Diego told me with a sarcastic smile. The problem was that I didn't have the money to do it. Everything I earned went straight to cover our basic needs and my mother's endless demand. Finally, I gave in. We sold the company to an outside buyer for much less than it was worth because my brothers were desperate for money. Diego spent it on a luxury car and a couple of trips. Patricia invested in a business that failed within a few months, and I was left with nothing. Shortly after, the company closed, leaving several employees out of work. I felt like I had betrayed my father's memory and the effort we had both put into that project. It was the lowest point in my life. My wife, although understanding, was visibly frustrated. Matthias began to notice that something was not right. I felt like a failure, not only as a professional, but as a father and husband. I thought things couldn't get any worse, but I was wrong. One night, my mother called me crying. Diego had crashed his new car, was up to his neck in debt, and now she wanted me to help him out of that mess. Patricia, on the other hand, had returned home after losing everything, and my mother was worried because she didn't know how to support them. That's when something inside me snapped. "I can't take this anymore," I said. "I'm not going to be anyone's savior anymore. If Diego and Patricia want help, they can find a way to get through this on their own." I hung up the phone, feeling more guilty than I should, but also liberated. After that conversation with my mother, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. However, problems seemed to follow me like a shadow. Diego and Patricia did not take kindly to my decision to cut off support. Instead of accepting responsibility, they began spreading rumors among our extended family, painting me as the ungrateful son who had abandoned his mother and siblings in their greatest time of need. Uncles, cousins, and even some close friends began to look at me differently. I received text messages full of reproaches. "How can you leave your mother alone after everything she did for you?" Or, "Your brothers need help, and you abandoned them as if they weren't your blood." The worst thing was that, although those words hurt me, they weren't seeing the real problem. One afternoon, while I was returning from a job interview, because yes, even with my experience as an engineer, I had lost all my network of contacts after the sale of the company, I received an urgent call from my mother. When I answered, I heard her voice filled with tears. "Jose, I was evicted. We lost our house." My world came to a standstill. How was this possible? That house had been in our family for decades, a place full of memories of my childhood and my parents' efforts. But Diego had taken out a loan using the house as collateral to pay off his debts, and, unable to meet the payments, the bank seized it. Diego and Patricia returned to my mother's house as if nothing had happened, expecting her to protect them, but there was no house to return to. My mother had to move in with a distant aunt, while my brothers disappeared completely, without offering an apology or assuming any responsibility. Patricia went to live with a friend, and Diego simply stopped answering her calls. But I knew that sooner or later they would both find a way to use me again. While all this was going on, my wife Sophia was my rock. Even though there were times of tension in our marriage, she always reminded me how important it was to not lose faith in ourselves. One night, while having dinner with Matthias, she told me something that changed my perspective. "Maybe this is your chance to start over. Stop looking back, Jose. You don't have to bear your family's decision. This is your moment." Inspired by his words, I started looking for jobs in other cities. Eventually, I landed a position at a small but promising construction company. It wasn't my dream salary, but it was a start. I started saving every penny, determined to build something new for my family. A year later, things started to look up for me. I had managed to get a promotion at work, we were about to move to a bigger apartment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was bright. But just when I was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, Diego and Patricia reappeared. Diego found me at the construction site where I was working and said, with a cynical smile, "I heard you're doing well now. now. Maybe you can help me out a little, huh? We're brothers, at the end of the day. I couldn't believe his nerve. After everything he had done, after ruining the inheritance and destroying the family relationship, he now expected me to be his savior again. For the first time in my life, I answered him coldly, Diego, don't look for me anymore. If you're in trouble, it's because you brought it on yourself. I'm not going to take on your mistakes again. Diego's visit wasn't the worst of it, though. A week later, my mother called me, crying like never before. She was sick, but she didn't want to tell me. She had been spending her few remaining savings on helping Diego and Patricia, and now she didn't even have enough money for their medicine. That call broke my heart. As much as I wanted to stand firm, I couldn't ignore my mother. I decided to take a flight to see her and try to sort things out once and for all. When I arrived, I found a heartbreaking scene. My mother was weak. She could barely get out of bed, and the house where she lived was a mess. Diego and Patricia had returned and were living there without contributing anything, leaving my mother to carry everything while they continued to enjoy a life of irresponsibility. It was at that moment that I made a drastic decision. This is over. If you want to continue living this way, do so, but not with me. My mother, through tears and with a broken voice, begged me not to abandon my brothers. They are your blood, Jose. You can't leave them like this. Please don't make me choose between you. That moment was heartbreaking. I knew my mother wasn't doing it out of malice, but because she had always had a soft spot for Diego and Patricia. But this time, she couldn't give in. Mom, it's not fair that you have to carry them. They're abusing you and you know it. If you don't make a decision, they'll end up destroying you completely. While I was trying to talk to my mother, I heard laughter coming from Patricia's room. I walked over and found my two brothers playing video games like there wasn't a care in the world. I lost my cool. What the hell are you doing? Mom is sick and you don't even have the decency to help her. Get out of this house right now. Diego stood up, trying to intimidate me. And who do you think you are to tell us what to do? This is our house too. If you don't like it, get out yourself. But this time, I wasn't going to let myself be intimidated. No, Diego, this is Mom's house, and you have no right to live here if you're not going to contribute anything. Either help or leave, period. In the middle of the argument, Patricia exploded. So what? You're the perfect son now? Do you think Mom always preferred you because you were the smart one? Well, guess what, Jose? This is all your fault. If you hadn't insisted on being the successful one in the family, maybe we wouldn't have been left with nothing. I was stunned. How could she blame me for something they themselves had destroyed? But before I could answer, Patricia blurted out something that left me speechless. Do you want to know the truth? Mom never wanted you to be an engineer. She only supported your studies because Dad asked for it before he died. Deep down, she always felt that you were moving away from us, and she was right. Now look at you, trying to teach us life lessons. That night, I sat down with my mother and asked her to tell me the truth. Was what Patricia had said true? My mother, with tears in her eyes, confessed, "It's not that I didn't want you to be an engineer, Jose. It's just that in focusing so much on your success, I sometimes felt like you forgot about us. But that doesn't mean I'm not proud of you. I always have been." That confession broke my heart. I realized that although I had done everything I could to support my family, I had also failed to see things from their perspective. But I couldn't continue to allow my brothers to abuse her. The next day, to my surprise, Diego showed up with a suitcase. "I'm leaving, Jose. You're right, this can't go on like this. But don't think I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this for Mom. And someday, when I'm successful, I'm going to show you that you're not the only one who can get ahead." Although he didn't know whether to believe her, he was relieved that she was at least taking a step toward independence. Patricia, on the other hand, refused to leave. "I have nowhere to go, Jose, and I'm not going to leave Mom alone, even if you want to kick us out." That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard my mother crying in her room. It wasn't the first time, but this time the pain in her sobs was deeper. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I walked into her room and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands on her face. I approached slowly, not knowing how to begin. "Mom, what's going on? Please tell me the truth." She looked up, her eyes swollen and red, and said something he hadn't expected. "Jose, I can't take this anymore. I can't keep watching you three destroy yourself. Your father would be so disappointed. He wanted you to be a united family, not this." Those words hit me like a brick. I had always thought I was doing the right thing, but I realized that in my eagerness to raise the family, I had neglected the most important thing, our relationship. Before I could say anything, however, Mom continued, "Diego and Patricia aren't bad, Jose. They're just lost. I know you see them as a burden, but to them you've always been a kind of shadow that they can't reach. They'll never admit it, but you make them feel small, like they can never be on your level. And I failed to make them feel valued for who they are." I stayed silent, processing what I had just heard. Mom was right, even though I didn't want to admit it. I had always felt that Diego and Patricia were a burden, but I never stopped to think about how they felt living living under constant comparison with me. Although that didn't justify their behavior, it did make me think. The next morning, Diego appeared at the front door. He was back. He had no suitcases or words of apology, just a look filled with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Mom hugged him immediately, as if she had been waiting for that moment. I, on the other hand, stood there watching him warily. Diego addressed me directly. "I want to talk to you, Jose." Alone. We walked out into the courtyard, where the cool morning air seemed to ease the tension a bit. Diego wasted no time. "I know I've been an idiot, but I'm not going to apologize because I know that words aren't going to change anything. What I want is to show you that I can change. I need you to give me a chance." I didn't know if I could trust him, but something in his tone made me consider the possibility. Before I could respond, Patricia appeared behind us, crossing her arm. "Are we really going to pretend that this can all be fixed with a couple of words? Don't make me laugh." The sarcasm in his voice lit a spark in me. I was about to respond, but Diego interrupted me. "Shut up, Patricia. This is between Jose and me." Patricia gaped, clearly surprised by the change in Diego. But instead of arguing, she turned and walked away, muttering something I couldn't hear. Diego looked back at me, his eyes full of determination. "I'm going to look for a job. I'm going to do things right. But I need your help, Jose. I don't know where to start." That was the first time in years that I saw Diego as the brother I had once admired as a child. I decided to give him a chance, but with clear condition. If he failed again, there would be no second chance. Patricia, on the other hand, continued to resist. She became more hostile, even toward Mom. One night, while we were having dinner, she exploded. "Why is it always Diego who gets second chances? What about me? Does my life not matter?" That question left me cold. For the first time, I saw Patricia for who she really was. Someone deeply hurt, someone who had spent years feeling invisible. I wanted to tell her that her life mattered, but before I could, she got up from the table and locked herself in her room. Things seemed to be in a constant state of tension, but something told me that we were moving forward, albeit at a slow pace. However, just when I was beginning to think that things could improve, something happened that changed everything. One night, while I was finishing some plans for an independent project I had landed, I heard a loud bang in the living room. I ran out and found Patricia standing there, her face disfigured and her hands shaking. Next to her was a vase shattered into pieces and Mom trying to calm her down. "I can't take it anymore. I'm sick of living like a shadow in this house. Everyone talks about Diego, about Jose, but no one talks about me." Patricia cried, with a mixture of fury and tears. Mom tried to hug her, but Patricia backed away, as if the physical contact burned her. "Don't touch me. You always justify everything. Diego does something right and is a hero. Jose saves the house and is a saint, but I am nothing to any of you." The rawness of her words left the room in a deathly silence. He had never seen Patricia like that, so vulnerable and at the same time so explosive. Diego came down the stairs at that moment, attracted by the screams, and was petrified when he saw her. "Patricia, I didn't know you felt that way," he started to say, but she interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't. You don't know anything about me, Diego. Neither do you, nor Jose, nor Mom. They just see me as a burden. Do you know what it feels like? To be the little sister, the one who always needs rescuing, but who is never asked how she really is." Patricia turned and walked out of the house, leaving behind a void that none of us knew how to fill. Mom started crying, while Diego and I looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Finally, I decided to go after her. I found her sitting in the nearby park, hugging her knees and sobbing. "Patricia," I said softly, sitting down beside her. She didn't lift her head, but she spoke, her voice breaking. "You know what's the worst part, Jose? I didn't want Dad to die, but I didn't want him to take everything with him either. When he left, you two became heroes to Mom, and I was left here alone, trapped, not knowing what to do with my life." Her words hit me like a train. For years, I had been so busy trying to keep the house and the company going that I never stopped to think about how Patricia felt. I always saw her as someone shallow and selfish, but now I understood that behind that facade was someone who just wanted to be seen and heard. "I'm sorry, Patricia. I should never have ignored you. I should never have assumed I was doing what was best for everyone without even asking you how you felt," I said, sincerely. She raised her head and looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you really see me now, Jose? Or are you just saying that because you feel guilty?" "I see you, Patricia, I swear, and I want you to be a part of this, not a bystander. But I need you to trust me, just as I'm going to trust you." For the first time in years, I saw a small spark of hope in his eyes. He nodded slowly, though he didn't say anything else. That night, when we returned home, there was a sense of relief, but also uncertainty. I knew the road to repairing our relationship would be long, but I was willing to try. But just when things seemed like they might be looking up, I got a call that would change everything. It was from a former coworker who informed me that the new owner of the company I had built was about to sell it to a foreign corporation. The news left me cold. I knew what that meant: massive layoffs and the end of the company I had built alongside Dad. I decided to act quickly. I gathered Diego and Patricia together, explained the situation, and proposed something unthinkable: to work together to save what was left of the company. Diego, who had shown a genuine change, immediately agreed. Patricia hesitated, but eventually agreed as well, although with clear condition. She wanted to be recognized as a partner and not as a mere support. What followed was a race against time, full of obstacles, unexpected betrayals, and moments of despair. Over the next few weeks, my days became a whirlwind of meetings, frantic calls, and strategizing to keep the company Dad and I had built from ending up in the hands of a foreign corporation. Convincing Diego and Patricia to collaborate had been the first step, but working together was a whole different challenge. The tensions between us didn't disappear overnight, and there were times when it seemed like we were going to fall apart before we even got started. One afternoon, while we were going through old financial documents at home, Patricia found something none of us had ever seen before: a file of handwritten notes from Dad. It was a kind of diary filled with ideas, advice, and reflections on what he had imagined the future of the company would look like. On one of the pages, there was a sentence that left us speechless: "The true strength of this family is in what we build together, not in what we own." Those words hit me like a bucket of cold water. For years, I had been so obsessed with maintaining Dad's material legacy that I had neglected his true legacy, our family. But despite the impact it had on me, things didn't get any easier. That same night, Patricia and Diego had a heated discussion about the role each of them should play in the project. "You've always been the favorite, Diego," cried Patricia, tears in her eyes. "You were left with the company when Dad died, while I was left with a void and expectations that were impossible to meet. Why should I now trust that you won't do the same?" Diego, visibly affected, responded with a sincerity he rarely showed. "I don't know how to fix what I did, Patricia. I was wrong, and it hurts me to have destroyed what Dad left us. But now I'm here trying to make amends. I don't know if it's enough, but it's all I have." The conversation ended in an awkward silence, but something changed after that. Patricia, though still wary, began to get more involved in the project. She proved to be incredibly talented at handling social media and public relations, an area in which Diego and I were completely inexperienced. For his part, Diego used his contacts in the business world to attract potential investors interested in saving the company. Just when it seemed like we were gaining ground, another unexpected blow came. I received a legal letter from the foreign corporation that was in the process of buying the company. Not only were they planning to acquire it, but they had also found a way to nullify my right to claim any part of it. I had been locked out of my own creation. I felt the ground beneath my feet give way. Everything we had worked for seemed to be crumbling again. But instead of giving up, I decided to take a huge risk. I gathered Diego and Patricia together and proposed something crazy. Instead of trying to stop the sale, we would create a new company from scratch, using the ideas and values Dad had left in his diary. First, they both looked at me as if I was crazy. "Are you saying we should abandon Dad's company?" Diego asked, incredulous. "I'm not saying we abandon it. I'm saying we reimagine it. Dad always believed in adapting, in changing with the time. If we keep holding on to the past, we'll never move forward." Finally, they agreed. We started working day and night, using the few resources we had to develop a new business model. Patricia used her contacts to launch a social media campaign that captured the attention of the local community, while Diego and I looked for small but committed investors. The tension didn't go away, though. One day, while we were discussing a contract, Patricia revealed something that left me cold. "There's something I haven't told you. Some of the contacts I'm using are people who worked for the corporation that's buying the company. I'm using information that could be considered confidential." Diego exploded. "That's illegal, Patricia. What if they sue us? We could lose everything." But I saw it differently. "She's doing what she thinks is necessary to protect us. I'm not saying it's right, but we can't stop now. If this information helps us stay afloat, then we need to use it carefully." The risk we took by using confidential information turned out to be greater than we imagined. The corporation, upon learning that we were playing dirty, wasted no time in sending lawyers to our door, threatening us with million-dollar lawsuits. A couple of days later, the news was filled with headlines about the legal battle we had unleashed. The pressure on us was so great that the days seemed endless. There were nights when I didn't know if I was running out of energy or if my heart just couldn't take it anymore. But every time I felt like everything was going to collapse, I remembered something Dad always said: "It doesn't matter how many times you fall, What matters is how many times you get up. At that moment, I knew I couldn't give up, not even in the face of legal challenges, not even when life seemed to want to crush me. I couldn't let his sacrifices, his dreams, his legacy crumble because of a wrong decision I had made out of fear. Finally, after months of struggle, we received unexpected news. The corporation, after seeing our determination and how we had managed to gather so many local investors and allies, gave up. Their strategy of intimidation had not worked, and they decided to abandon the purchase of the company. Instead of continuing with their lawsuit, they offered to collaborate to ensure that the transition would be as amicable as possible. It was a victory, but not just any victory. It was our victory. But the most shocking thing of all was not the fact that we won. It was what came next. Patricia, Diego, and I, despite all the conflicts and disagreements, looked each other in the eye and understood that, at the end of the day, what really mattered was not the company or the money. What really mattered was that we were together as a family. We had fought, fallen, gotten up, and finally, we began to understand the real lesson that Dad had tried to teach us. True success is not in what you have, but in the people around you and what you do to protect them. From that moment on, the new company we created was not just a business. It was a symbol of what we could achieve when we joined together. We started receiving offers from larger companies, but we were no longer interested in selling. We had found something much more valuable. True strength was in us as a family, not in material wealth. The day we celebrated the success of our new venture, I looked at Diego, Patricia, and my mother. I was at dinner with them, reminiscing about everything we had been through, when I realized something I had never seen before. That struggle, that pain, those tears had brought us together in a way no other experience could have done. Not only had we regained what we had lost, we had found something far more valuable. So, even though everything seemed to have fallen apart in the past, I understood that that battle was the one that had made us stronger. We had lost a lot, but in the end, we had won the most important thing: unity, love, and mutual respect. And finally, I could see clearly that life, despite everything it takes from us, also gives us the opportunity to rebuild what really matters. All my life, I dreamed of being a singer. Since I was little, whenever I heard music, I felt like the world disappeared and I became someone different. The rhythms, the lyrics, the emotion that the singers put into their songs, everything made me believe that one day I would be on stage, doing the same thing. But my life was not easy. I was born into a lower-class family, where the priorities were not dreams, but survival. My parents never understood my love for music. That doesn't feed you, they always told me. My mother, tired of seeing me waste my time on what she considered a waste, insisted that I dedicate myself to something more realistic, like studying a career or getting a stable job. My body was never what I expected for a singer. I was always a large, overweight man without much physical ability. People always looked at me and told me that I could never sing because my body didn't allow it. I remember that even when I tried to do breathing or vocal exercises, the effort left me exhausted, and fatigue was very noticeable on my face. However, my passion for music never died. No matter how much people told me, I always felt that I had something special. But the obstacles didn't only come from my physique, but also from the people I had around me. My partner, who was initially supportive of my dream, began to doubt me when things didn't move forward. She became frustrated because she couldn't understand why I wouldn't settle for a normal, stable job like everyone else. "Why can't you be happy with what you have?" she asked me every time I told her about my frustrations. She saw me struggle and see no results. Her patience was wearing thin, and I felt like no matter what I tried to do, I was never going to be good enough for her. All of this only increased my frustration and pain. Music became a refuge, my only form of escape. I knew that if they didn't support me, at least I could continue to fight for my dream. The worst of all was when I decided to really take my career seriously. I decided that if they wouldn't support me, then I would do it for myself. I started investing my time, my savings, everything I could into my dream. I signed up for singing classes and went to gyms to improve my physique because I understood that if I didn't change my appearance, no one would take me seriously. I knew that I couldn't stay where I was, that to achieve my dream, I had to transform myself both inside and out. For months, I would get up before 5 a.m. to run, to vocalize, to study music. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't go on, that my body wasn't responding, that my mind couldn't take it. The fatigue was so great that my legs wouldn't respond. But there was something inside me, a force that I didn't understand, that pushed me to keep going. Despite people's negative comments, the mockery, the rejection, I remained firm in my decision to keep going. There was one night, after a long day of work at my full-time job, when I got a text that completely broke me. My partner told me he didn't want to be with me anymore. "I'm not seeing you progress," he wrote. "Your dream of being a singer is destroying our relationship, our life together. I can't take it anymore." That hit me harder than I expected. It was like everything I had done up until that point, everything I had sacrificed, had been for nothing. But the worst part was that, even though it hurt, I felt like there was something inside me that kept insisting, that told me I had to move on. I left everything behind. I left the relationship, I left my family, I left my old job. Everything. In my mind, there was no turning back. I did it for me, for my dream, for something that had been stronger than anything else in my life. Months passed, and despite my sacrifice, life didn't get any easier. My body didn't respond the way I wanted it to, and my voice wasn't perfect either. But something inside me, an invisible force, kept me going. Over time, I started to see results. I started getting a little more attention on my social media, some small jobs here and there, but never enough to make a living from music. Yet, despite it all, something had changed in me. I started to see hard work in a different way. I knew that this was just the beginning, that the effort would eventually pay off. Sometimes I'd find myself looking at old photos from when I was with my partner, and I'd feel like life had left me behind. But then I'd listen to one of my songs again, and I'd realize that none of that mattered. Life isn't about what you lose, it's about what you keep looking for. And I, despite everything that had happened, was still looking for my dream. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my efforts were being rewarded, even if in a subtle way. However, something inside me said that this was not enough, that if I really wanted to fulfill my dream, I had to sacrifice even more. And so, I made a decision. I was willing to lose everything to make it in music. I no longer cared what it cost me. I no longer cared about the people who had left. I was going to keep going until I got it. But the time had not yet come. The time when he would feel that everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed, had finally been worth it. And he knew he would make it, no matter how much he had to lose along the way. Every day that passed, I felt closer to something, but also further away. As if for every small step forward, the universe put up a new barrier. There were days when I woke up so tired that I thought all the sacrifice would not be worth it. But then I remembered that feeling when I sang. That moment of liberation, of feeling alive, as if I were in my place. I remembered the words of my mother, who, although she never supported me, always said that people who followed their dreams to the end were the ones who really managed to do something important. And although I did not feel supported by my family or anyone else, those words continued to resonate in my head. One day, after weeks of no rest, I finally managed to record a song that I felt was my best work. The studio wasn't professional, the quality wasn't the best, but I felt like I had created something genuine, something that came from deep within me. I decided to upload the song to my social media, even though I never expected it to go viral. That's when, for the first time, I felt a spark of hope. Messages of support started coming in. Some people told me that my music had touched their heart, that it had given them strength. Others shared with me how my song had helped them move forward, as if what I had experienced had touched a chord within them. But while things were starting to look up, something still plagued me. Every time I saw my follower count increase or heard someone talk about my music, I felt happy, but at the same time, I felt like I had lost everything. I felt like I had left behind the people who mattered the most, the ones who had known me at my worst. That feeling of loneliness haunted me, like I could never escape it, no matter how much progress I made. Sometimes, I felt like music was the only thing I had left, and if I lost that, I would lose my reason for being. One day, while I was in the studio recording something new, I received a text that almost made me fall. It was from my ex-girlfriend. The text said something like, "I've seen what you've been doing. I've seen that you've improved, that you've accomplished something. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm really hurt by everything that happened, but I'm also proud of you." My heart skipped a beat. On the one hand, I felt like life was giving me a chance at reconciliation, at getting back what I had lost. But on the other hand, I knew that nothing would be the same. I knew that if she came back, my dream of being a singer would be clouded by what I had left behind. My heart was divided. The answer I gave her was not what I expected. I told her that, although I appreciated her words, everything that had happened had taught me that my path was no longer the one we shared. It was hard for me to say that, because despite everything I had suffered, I loved her, but I knew I couldn't go back to the past. I couldn't put my life on hold just because someone appeared in my path again. I had to move forward for myself, for my dream. In the days that followed, my music began to gain more attention, but with that attention came new challenges. People who were only interested in exploiting my image, in making me do things I didn't want to do. Contracts started coming in, but I didn't like the term. I felt like the music industry wasn't what I imagined. There was a lot of noise, a lot of people who just wanted me to sell my soul for a few bucks. The last thing I wanted was to become something I wasn't, something shallow, something empty. One night, when I was more tired than ever, not knowing if all the effort had been worth it, I received a private message from an anonymous person. "Don't give up. I'm listening to what you do. I've been following you since you posted that first song. My life has changed because of your music, too. That gave me strength." Something in those words made me feel like I was on the right path. But it also reminded me that despite everything I had left behind, there were people out there who did understand what I was trying to do. Even though the world was against me, there were people who felt the same way I did, and that filled me with hope. However, the battle was not won. I knew that for every door that opened, others were also closing. Sometimes, I felt like I couldn't take it anymore, and then I thought about everything I had sacrificed. My friends, my partner, my family, my emotional stability. But on the other hand, I knew that my music had touched someone, that my voice had reached the hearts of many people. In those difficult moments, I thought that maybe all this was what I was really meant to do. Maybe life had led me down this path for something bigger, for something that I myself didn't understand. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't give up now. Even if the people around me didn't believe in me, even if I was left alone on this journey, I wasn't going to stop until I saw my dream come true. The road was long and full of obstacles, but I was willing to follow it. It didn't matter how many times I had to start over. It didn't matter how many doors were closed. My dream was closer than I thought. The days went by and I kept fighting. My life was no longer just about my music, but a constant internal battle. On the surface, everything seemed to be going well. People were starting to recognize me, sending me messages of support. But inside, I felt empty. My old insecurities came back every time I looked in the mirror, when I thought about the physical state I was in. No matter how many followers I had or how many songs I sold, I felt like none of it truly fulfilled me. Sometimes I woke up feeling like everything I had done up until that point had been in vain. And it was on one of those dark mornings that I received a call that would change everything. It was my sister, somewhat worried. She told me that my mother was not feeling well, that her health had worsened. It was as if the whole world was falling apart. My mother, always so strong, so full of life, was now being devoured by a disease that even I could not fully understand. At that moment, I felt more alone than ever. I realized that, although I had done everything possible to achieve my dream, the price of that dedication was the abandonment of everything that really mattered. The music, the fame, the fans, none of that mattered if my mother wasn't well. What was the point of having all the achievements if I couldn't share them with her? My days became a mix of studio and recording moments, but also constant visits to the hospital. The emotional burden was so heavy that I didn't know if I could go on. There were times when I felt like music didn't make sense anymore, that it wasn't worth continuing to sing if I couldn't be with her. But on the other hand, I knew I had to stand firm because she wanted me to keep going. That's when, despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, I began to write more intensely. Music went from being an escape to becoming an act of healing. Every note I played, every verse I composed, I did so with the hope that somehow my mother would hear what I was creating and be proud of me. I realized that if I wanted to be someone in life, if I really wanted to achieve something, I had to give it my all. Not just for myself anymore, but for her as well. But then, something happened. After weeks of care and effort, my mother collapsed. It was a dark, cold night, one of those nights when the world seems to stop. I got the call in the middle of recording a song, a work I had been preparing for weeks. My heart stopped beating for a second, and all I could do was run to the hospital. I had no words, no strength. The ride to the hospital was the longest of my life. When I arrived, I saw my mother hooked up to a machine, fighting for her life. At that moment, the world I had built around my music began to crumble. I stood by her side until her breathing stopped, and with it, a part of me left as well. I was empty. All the energy I had put into my career seemed to have lost its meaning. What was I doing? What was the point of all this if I couldn't save the person I loved the most? For days I was lost, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to continue. Sadness consumed me, and the only way to calm my mind was to lock myself in my room to write songs. The difference now was that I no longer did it with the hope of being recognized, but with the urgent need to heal. In the days that followed, messages of support from my followers increased. Each one of them seemed to have something valuable to say, something that made me feel like what I had done up to that point had touched lives. But something had changed in me. Music was no longer just my dream, my passion. It had become the way I could deal with the pain, the way I could keep going. It wasn't just a refuge, it was my only way to feel alive again. Time passed, and little by little the wound began to heal, but not in the way I imagined. Not everything was fixed with songs and followers. It was a long and painful process, and even now, sometimes I find myself in moments of despair. But my mother's love, her unconditional support in the most difficult moments, remains my greatest motivation. And then one day, something amazing happened. In the midst of my constant struggle to get ahead, to find peace within myself, I received an offer from a major record label. They wanted to sign me. They wanted my music to go even further. But in that moment, I realized something I never would have imagined. I didn't need fame to feel complete. I didn't need validation from anyone. What I had been searching for all this time, that happiness I so desperately wanted was already within me. It wasn't fame or money that was going to save me. It was the music itself. And what really mattered was that my mother, wherever she was, had seen that I didn't give up. But the decision I made in that instant was even more surprising. I told them no, I would not accept the contract. Not out of fear of failure, but because I had come to understand that music, my music, was priceless. It was no longer about becoming someone else. It was about being me. It was about honoring everything my mother taught me. And that is the real victory, the one that no one can take away from you. Now, I look back and realize that the real dream wasn't to sing for thousands of people. It wasn't to be famous. The real dream was to find peace and happiness, even in the darkest times. And all of that I achieved no matter what obstacles I faced. Time went on, and while everyone told me I had done something crazy by turning down the contract, I was still fighting my own battle. The label wanted me to be at the center of the scene, to be their star, but I didn't want that. I didn't want my music to be just another product. I knew that if I gave myself over to fame, I would be losing what had gotten me there, my authenticity. I knew that if I pursued glory at any cost, I would lose everything that was really worth it. I wasn't willing to let my mother fight all her life for me to be just another one in the crowd. But still, life didn't stop. My decisions, although they gave me peace, didn't allow me to live the way I dreamed. My savings began to dwindle, and although my passion remained intact, the pressure of reality was catching up with me. The small concerts I did, where people saw me as an emerging figure, weren't enough to cover my debt. I lived day to day with the uncertainty of whether everything I had done so far would be worth it, and more importantly, whether I would ever see success the way I had dreamed. And then one day, an old childhood friend showed up. We had known each other since we were kids, and he knew how much I had struggled to get to where I was. He had taken a different path, gotten into the business world, and was now starting to find success with a new music social network. He offered me a chance to collaborate with him, something I would have never imagined would happen. First, I was skeptical. Did I really want to get involved with something so big? My dream had always been to be a singer, not to be part of a corporation or something more commercial. But something in his voice, something in his words, made me think that maybe I was being too narrow-minded. Maybe I could still be me, but now with the chance to go even further. I accepted his offer, but this time it was different. My focus was no longer fame, but art. My goal was not to fill stadiums, but to fill heart. If I managed to touch people with my music, then that would be enough. If I ever thought about success, I would see it as another step towards reaching my people, not as a means to get money or recognition. My songs were still the same, but now I had the power to bring them to a wider audience. The fear was still there, but now there was also hope. Yet, in the midst of all this, the pressure continued to mount. My relationship with my partner, who had left me at some point, began to resurface in my mind. I had assumed that the people who were once by my side would still be there, but the truth was that my world had completely changed. Fame and the struggle for success were getting the best of me, and when she reappeared, it was as if time had turned back. I realized that, despite everything that had happened, a part of me was still waiting for her support. But what I didn't know was if I could offer her what she needed. But still, I kept going. The collaboration with my friend was growing, and my music was expanding even more. People were starting to talk about me, and while that excited me, something was still empty. I didn't know what it was, but the feeling that something was missing was constant. It didn't matter how many followers I had, how many messages of support I received. Success was coming, but it didn't feel as good as I had imagined. I was missing something else. One day, during a recording, I looked in the mirror and realized that what I had lost could not be recovered. I had sacrificed many things along the way. My time, my relationships with the people closest to me, my mental health. I had done all this for my dream, but I wondered if the price had been too high. Was everything I had left behind really worth it? It was a question I still couldn't answer, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it. And that's when I got a call that blew my mind. An industry acquaintance, someone who had been watching my progress, offered me an opportunity that would completely change my life. Contract I couldn't refuse. This time it wasn't a record label or a company that saw me as a product. It was a chance to finally be recognized for my authentic music, for my voice to reach the world in the way I always dreamed of. The problem was, as that opportunity approached, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The price of success was becoming too high for me, and I was starting to wonder if it was worth it. It wasn't just about being a singer anymore. It wasn't just about achieving my dream anymore. It was about finding the balance between what I loved and what I had sacrificed to achieve it. And that was the battle I didn't know how to win. I found myself at a crossroads I never imagined I would face. The contract I had received was everything I had dreamed of, but at the same time, I felt like I was about to lose it all. My life had become a balance between my personal desires and the price I was willing to pay to achieve them. When I thought about everything I had done so far, I realized that the road had been longer than I had imagined. I had given everything for my dream, but my dream had also cost me my relationships, my emotional stability, and even my health. My friends, those with whom I shared the first days of struggle, were no longer by my side. They had disappeared because they did not understand what I was going through. They did not understand that what drove me was a passion so great that it made me risk everything else. At the same time, my family, who never believed in me at first, started to become distant, as if they were waiting for me to fail so they could say, "I told you so." But despite everything, something inside me kept fighting, kept believing that I could make it, even if it meant doing it alone. But the call from the label was just around the corner, and fear was beginning to consume me. Was I willing to give it all up for a chance? Was I ready to face fame and everything that came with it? The idea of being recognized for my music no longer seemed so appealing. I thought about everything I had already lost and wondered if I still had anything left to lose. Then, one rainy afternoon came when I received an unexpected text from her. Catalina, my ex-girlfriend, the one who had left me when I didn't believe in my dream. It had been months since our last conversation, and time had made the pain I felt from her departure slowly dissipate. But that text was different. In it, she told me that she was proud of me, that she had seen my progress, my struggle, and that she now understood why I had done what I did. And in a moment I never expected, she told me that if I ever wanted to try again, she would be willing. Just reading those words sent me reeling. What did I really want? Was I so focused on my music that I had missed the chance to have someone who, in the end, believed in me? But I also knew that music, my music, was my first priority. Would I be able to give in to the temptation of what could have been and let go of what I had dreamed of for so long? The call from the record label kept ringing in my head. The contract was on the table, and the opportunities it brought with me were invaluable. But now I had to make a decision that would change my life. Could I return to Catalina, or rather, let her go for good to follow my path? Perhaps one that no longer had anything to do with what I had been before? The internal struggle was so real, so painful, that I felt like everything I had done so far was in danger of crumbling in a second. What if I took the contract and fame changed me? What if, in the end, I forgot what was really worthwhile in life, like the people who had supported me along this long road? What if I forgot what I wanted most? Several days passed in which uncertainty took over me. I couldn't make a decision. My nights became endless, mired in doubt. My music, which had once been my refuge, now felt like a burden, as if it were the only means to achieve something in life that would define me. I couldn't break out of that vicious cycle, and the worst of all was that, when I looked around, I saw the people who had been by my side in the darkest moments, like my mother and sister, looking at me worriedly, as if they realized what was at stake. It was at that moment, when I was on the cusp of making my move to fame, that something incredible happened. Someone I never expected texted me. It was an old friend, someone I had worked with in the early days of my music career. He told me that he had been watching my progress, and somehow, without knowing how, I had managed to get an opportunity that I had never even imagined. He proposed that I work with him on a completely independent project, a project where the music would once again be the focus and not the show, where people could connect with my songs in a genuine way, an opportunity that didn't come with the constraints of fame, but with the freedom I had always sought. Now, the dilemma was clear. The record label contract was still on the table with all its benefits, but also with everything I didn't want. Meanwhile, my friend's project was what could really give me the peace I needed, even if it was a much bigger risk. I felt like my entire path had led me to this point, and the decisions I made now would be the ones that would mark the rest of my life. It was no longer just about fame, about music, about Catalina, or even about what others expected of me. It was about finding who I really was and what I wanted for my life, no matter how many sacrifices I had to make. Now, I had to choose. I took some time to think, to disconnect from the noise and put my emotions in order. I was at that point in my life where I felt that everything depended on the decision I made. Sometimes, life doesn't give you easy answers. It only offers you paths full of uncertainty and challenges. I decided that I couldn't follow the path I already knew, that of superficial fame, of making music just to satisfy others. I realized that what I really wanted was to reconnect with the essence of what made me happy. Music, art, and being able to share my voice with those who really needed to hear it, not with those who just wanted to consume it to go along with the flow. I opted for my friend's project. Despite the uncertainty, despite the fact that I was starting over with little to nothing, I felt like I had made the right decision. I felt free, because in the end, what I had lost along the way was not as important as what I was gaining. My peace, my integrity, and my love for music. It was hard at first. We had to fight for every little step forward, but little by little, people started to notice the difference. My music was no longer a commercial product, but something something real, something people could feel. They started to listen to me, to connect with me in a genuine way, and that fulfilled me more than any superficial achievement. And even though Catalina never came back, I never stopped thinking about her. But I understood that my life did not depend on one person or on external validation. In the end, what really matters is the relationship you have with yourself and what you are able to build when you do not let yourself be carried away by the expectations of others. Years went by, and although I didn't achieve the fame that everyone imagined I would achieve, I became a reference in a smaller, more authentic circle. My music was still my refuge and my way of expressing myself, and what mattered to me more than ever was that the people who listened to me felt the same way. True success was not measured by the number of followers, by money, or by popularity. True success was knowing that I was doing what I loved, that I had not sold my soul for anything, that I had chosen the most difficult path, but the most sincere one. So even though life put me at a crossroads and demanded sacrifices from me, I understood that, in the end, the price I had paid for following my dreams the right way was worth more than anything else I could have achieved.
My uncle stole everything from my father. So I became a lavier to get revenge.
I grew up in a small town, a place where field work was the only thing known, where sweat and soil became an extension of your own efforts. My family, though poor, was always a pillar of love and struggle. But everything changed when I was only 10 years old, when my life was marked by a betrayal that I could never have anticipated. My father, a man of few resources but with impeccable morals, was stripped of what belonged to him by his own brother, my uncle. That man who for years had lived in his shadow, hoping one day to receive something from the family inheritance, took everything from him. He left us empty-handed. My father never knew how to defend himself, much less understand what was happening. He was illiterate, unable to read or write, which prevented him from understanding the magnitude of what was coming upon him. My uncle, cunningly and without scruples, manipulated the situation and managed to have the entire family inheritance transferred to his name. There was no trial or defense. My dad, because of his ignorance and lack of resources, never had a chance. I watched as my mother tried to stay calm as the household bills piled up and opportunities seemed increasingly scarce. Everything we had earned through hard work and sacrifice, but none of that mattered when my uncle's betrayal was consummated. I was young, but I still understood that something was not right. Anger began to grow inside me, and although I did not know how I could change the situation, I knew I had to do something. The opportunity to study in the city, to leave the countryside and enter the world of lawyers, had always been my dream. I knew I could defend my dad, that I could fight for what had been taken from us, but to do that I had to be a lawyer. I had to go to the city and study law. However, my parents did not have the money or the resources to send me. The dream of studying in the city seemed so far away, so unattainable. But that anguish, that helplessness, became fuel for my determination. I spent my days in the fields working alongside my father, but there was only one thing on my mind: the desire to become a lawyer. I resolved that no obstacle, not even my situation, would stop me. I began saving as much as I could. It didn't matter how little it was, that I had to give up basic things. I knew I had to make sacrifice. Sometimes I felt stuck, staring at the walls of our house and feeling like my dreams would never materialize. But every time I remembered the injustice my dad had suffered, I found the strength to keep going. Weeks turned into months, and my efforts seemed to bear no fruit. My family was still struggling to survive, and I was still pursuing a goal that seemed unattainable. Until one day, a stroke of luck, or rather of fate, came into my life. I received a scholarship to study at a university in the city. The scholarship didn't cover all the expenses, but it was an opportunity one couldn't let go. From one day to the next, I found myself leaving behind my family, my town, my friend. The fear of failure was as great as the excitement of finally pursuing my dream. I arrived in the city, and the difference from my previous life was brutal. The noise, the fast pace, the people who seemed to have no time for anything made me feel completely out of place. However, I did not let myself be defeated. I knew I had a mission: to be a lawyer, to defend my family, to show that one could escape poverty through effort and determination. University was harder than I imagined. At first, my classmates made fun of me, of my accent, of my manners. I did not fit into that world. Sometimes I felt invisible, as if I did not belong there. However, what they did not know was that in my heart there was a fire that could not be extinguished. I did not care what they said, head, I did not care what they thought. My mind was fixed on one thing: becoming a lawyer. The first few months were the hardest. The exams, the endless readings, the endless work consumed me. But I never stopped fighting. I never let myself be defeated. In the darkest nights, when doubts invaded me, I thought about my dad, about the injustice he had suffered, about my family who still lived with the consequences of betrayal. I knew that I had to transform all that pain into motivation. Little by little, I began to stand out. My teachers began to notice my dedication, my effort. I was not the best student, but my determination and my desire to learn made me stand out. With each step I took, I felt closer to my goal. But the difficulties did not stop. My family continued to struggle in the field. My dad still did not know how to defend himself, and my uncle continued to enjoy what he had stolen from us. Despite my academic success, I felt that I had not yet won the most important battle of all. The day I was finally able to return to my village, after years of sacrifice, I felt like a stranger. My family had changed. The people I knew now seemed to be strangers to me. But still, the most important thing was yet to come. My dad looked at me with pride. I knew my sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Meeting him again was what gave me the strength to keep going. However, there was one thing that still haunted me: the inheritance. My uncle still owned everything, and my dad still couldn't do anything about it. That's when I decided I had to do something bigger than just studying law. I needed justice. I needed to fight for what belonged to us. I had to go back to the city, finish my degree, and learn everything I could about the legal system, because I knew that one day I was going to need to use all that knowledge to win our battle. Life in the city began to become more routine, but my mind remained focused on one goal: getting back what had been taken from us. Every class I took, every case I studied, everything was preparing me for a future where I could finally get justice, not just for myself, but for my family. The hope for a better future remained alive, although the sacrifices were still enormous. Over time, I began to gain some respect at the university. Classmates who had previously made fun of me were now beginning to see me differently. Some even asked me for help with their studies, as my focus and work ethic were unwavering. But while all that was happening, one shadow always hung over me: my family's situation. My dad still didn't know how to handle his brother's betrayal, and my mom, although happy to see me move forward, also felt the burden of everything we had lost. The calls from home were always sad, full of complaints about the difficult life in the countryside, the difficulties of surviving, the constant fights with my uncle, who continued to live as if nothing had happened. In each conversation, I felt as if something was tearing me apart inside. The dream of being a lawyer, of studying law, had become something bigger. It was the only way to give my family the justice they deserved. But it was also costing me too much. The nights I stayed up studying until dawn began to take their toll on me. The lack of rest, the emotional burden of what was happening at home, and the stress of exams made me feel closer to the limits of what I could bear. One day, after receiving a particularly distressing call from my mother, I felt my heart breaking. She told me that things in the countryside were going from bad to worse, that my father's health was no longer the same, and that my uncle, taking advantage of her ignorance, continued to take over everything that was ours. That call was the breaking point. My body and mind couldn't take it anymore, but my heart wouldn't let me give up. I thought that if I didn't fight for my family, who would? I decided to do whatever it took. My goal had become even clearer. I didn't just want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer who made history. I decided that, in addition to studying, I was going to prepare a case to confront my uncle, even if I didn't have anyone's support. If there was no justice, I would seek it on my own. From that moment on, I spent entire nights researching inheritances, laws that could help us, any loophole through which I could defend my father. My life became a whirlwind of study, work at the university, and the increasingly frequent calls from my family asking me to do something. Meanwhile, my relationship with the city became more distant. Although I had made progress in my studies, the university environment seemed emptier as the distance from my family became more painful. My relationship with my girlfriend, whom I had met before coming to the city, also began to deteriorate. She didn't understand the weight I carried on my shoulders. She complained about my constant absence, about my lack of time for her. She said that I only thought about my studies and that my family would always be my priority. But for me, that was the only thing I could do, the only thing I could give to my family. One day, after a long exchange of words, I decided that it was time to do what I had to do, no matter the consequence. The breakup was painful, but inevitable. No one understood what was at stake for me or what each sacrifice I was making meant. Loneliness took hold of me, but I didn't care. I knew that at some point, all efforts would have to pay off. I no longer just wanted to prove that I could be a lawyer. I wanted to do justice. I knew that the road would be long and full of obstacles, but something told me that I would succeed. When I finally reached the last year of my degree, degree, I felt that everything I had done up to that point was about to culminate. I had learned more than I could have imagined at first, and when the opportunity to present the case came, my heart beat faster than ever. I had to do it right. I had to win. My dad and mom traveled to the city to be with me during the trial. Although my dad didn't understand much about the whole process, the simple fact that he was there gave me the strength I needed. The trial began, and the pressure on my shoulders was unbearable. My uncle, with his arrogance, was present, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to fight for what was ours, but the surprises didn't stop there. The next day, just before the trial reached its most critical point, my uncle changed lawyers and presented new evidence that tried to destroy everything I had prepared. However, something in me changed. The anger, frustration, and tears for everything we had lost turned into strength. I was ready to fight until the end. The courtroom was full of tension. The lawyers were preparing for the next round of evidence, and my uncle's gaze, so full of contempt, dared me to give up. But I couldn't. My dad, with his tired face, his gaze empty from years of suffering, gave me the last spark of motivation. I saw in his eyes a ray of hope, and that was all I needed to keep going. The trial continued, and with every word I spoke, I felt I was getting closer to the outcome I so desired. But at some point, everything began to turn darker. During one of the breaks, one of the witnesses in favor of my uncle was found dead under strange circumstances. He was a man who had worked with my family in the past, and his testimony was key to the defense of my case. The news fell like a mortal blow. No one knew if it had been an accident or something premeditated. Doubts began to spread, and fear took hold of everyone in the courtroom. However, I did not let that knock me down. I could no longer afford to doubt. What was at stake was much greater than any obstacle. Weeks passed, and the situation became more complicated. The evidence I had began to crumble, as if fate was playing against me. My strength was failing. I started getting calls from my mom, crying, worried about what was happening to my dad. He could no longer bear the weight of all this. The illness that had been plaguing him for years now seemed to be getting worse. His strength was at its limit. On those nights, between court sessions and hours of study, I found myself alone, trying to concentrate while my family's life fell apart even further. Something inside me said I couldn't give up. But then, a letter came into my hand. It was from my mother. It said that my dad had suffered a cardiac arrest and was no longer there. The blow was so strong that I couldn't even fully understand it at first. Suddenly, all the effort, all the sleepless nights, all the struggle seemed meaningless. My dad was gone, and my life, which had always revolved around the promise to help him, fell apart. I didn't know what to do. All I had wanted was to give him and my family a better future. Why keep fighting? What good would it do to win this trial if he wasn't there to see it anymore? During those days, I walked away from the trial. I didn't want to face him. I didn't even want to hear about the inheritance or the case. I was empty, but something inside me kept insisting. The last conversation with my dad before his death came to mind. He had told me that he was proud of me, that no matter what happened, he would always be happy to see me fight for what was right. And those words were what pushed me to keep going. I couldn't let everything my dad had believed in me crumble. I decided to go back to the trial. When I arrived, my uncle was waiting with his arrogant smile. But as he watched me approach the stand, his face hardened. I couldn't lose focus. At that moment, I realized something. This fight wasn't just for my dad. It was for me, for my future, for everything I had sacrificed. I wouldn't be left behind. Every word I spoke was a tribute to my family, to my dad. I had come too far to give up. And then, just when all seemed lost, something unexpected happened. My uncle made a fatal mistake. During his defense, he tried to present forged documents that proved a completely different version of the story. But it was his own lawyer who unwittingly revealed the fraud in public. The air in the courtroom grew thick. My uncle's face fell. I knew I had lost. Victory was near, but something inside me told me that it wasn't just about this trial. It was about something much bigger. My life, my family's life, my future. It didn't matter anymore whether I won or lost the case. What mattered was that, from this moment on, I would become the man I always dreamed of being. The trial grew even more tense. Every day, as my uncle's evidence seemed to make things more complicated, I fought with everything I had. I felt caught between the helplessness of watching him manipulate the law in his favor and the desperation of not losing. My heart beat faster every time we saw a new move on his part. Yet something inside me kept me going. I looked at my dad, his face tired but full of hope, and I knew I couldn't let him down. At home, the situation was also getting worse. The countryside was still a dark and oppressive place, where my dad and mom worked like never before to survive, while my uncle continued to enjoy what had been taken from him. The calls from home became more and more desperate. My mom, who was always the pillar of our family, began to show signs of exhaustion, both physically and emotionally. "Why don't you just give up?" she asked asked me one day in a broken voice, "We've already lost so much. Do you really think this is going to change?" At that moment, I felt like everything I had done up to that point might fall apart. Doubt attacked me, making me question if all the sacrifice was really worth it. But something in me remained unshakable. Couldn't give up now. So, with a heavy heart, I decided to face it all. In the last week of the trial, my uncle made a mistake he didn't expect. During his testimony, he mentioned something he shouldn't have said, something that implied he had tampered with the inheritance document. In that instant, everything changed. The eyes of the previously distracted judges focused on him, and the scales of justice began to tip in our favor. But my uncle wasn't about to lose so easily. Over the next few days, he used every dirty tactic he knew. He tried to bribe witnesses, pressure those who could influence the decision, and even tried to intimidate my family with veiled threats. I wasn't just fighting him, but also a system full of cracks and corruption. As the trial progressed, my emotions fluctuated between hope and despair. Every time I thought we were close to victory, something went wrong. There were days when I locked myself in my room after the hearings, just to cry silently. I didn't want my family to see my weakness, but it was hard to contain the pressure. One day, after a particularly difficult trial, I decided to take a break in the park near the courthouse. I needed to clear my mind. I sat on a bench, staring at the gray sky. That's when I got a call that changed everything. It was my mom. Her voice was shaking on the other end of the line. "Son, your dad is in the hospital." My world fell apart. I ran to the hospital as fast as I could, but by the time I got there, it was too late. My dad had suffered a stroke. The pain of losing him was greater than I ever imagined. I felt like my soul was being ripped out of me. Everything I had done, everything I had fought for, seemed empty now. My dad was no longer going to be there to see this process through. As I cried in the hospital, I realized something that paralyzed me. I had not only lost my dad, but I was losing the very reason I was fighting for. And then, at that very moment, something incredible happened. My mom, with tears in her eyes, looked at me and said, "Your dad fought until the very end so that you could have a better life. Don't let this defeat you, son. Don't let you lose what he dreamed for you." My mom's words were the push I was missing. If I had learned anything from my father, it was to never give up, no matter how difficult the situation was. I knew my battle wasn't just for the inheritance, but for his legacy. I went back to the trial, heartbroken but full of determination. This time, sadness was no longer stopping me. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was silent. The judges deliberated for what seemed like hours, but in the end, they ruled in our favor. My uncle was found guilty of tampering with documents, and the inheritance was reverted to its rightful owner, my dad, through his legacy in me. Justice had come, but it was not a costless triumph. At the end of the trial, as I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, I couldn't help but think of everything I had sacrificed to get there. What started as a dream of justice had turned into a life lesson. I had won, but I had also lost something very important, my dad. Yet, at that very moment, I felt like something deeper had changed in me. I was no longer just the young man who wanted to win a case. I was someone who understood the true meaning of fighting for what you believe in, no matter the price. When everything seemed to be over, something inside me told me that I couldn't just sit still. I had already won the trial, but I still felt empty. The thrill of victory quickly faded as I realized that, although the inheritance was back in our hands, I had lost something much more valuable in the process: my father. Days passed, and the wound was still open. My mom, always so strong, seemed to be losing faith in life. She no longer smiled like before, and her exhaustion was evident. My dad's death had hit her harder than she expected. I began to wonder if all of this had really been worth it. Sadness consumed me, and even though people around me told me to be happy about the victory, I couldn't stop thinking about the lack of an important figure in my life. My relationship with my mom became strained. She wasn't as present at home anymore, and that only made me feel more alone. It became even harder because I didn't know if she understood me or if she was just mired in her own grief. Every time I tried to talk about what I had accomplished, she would just look at me with tired eyes and tell me that none of it mattered if we didn't have dad to share it with. I was completely devastated. To top it off, things at work weren't going well either. People in the village looked down on my achievements, as if, despite having won, I would always remain a peasant's son, someone who didn't belong in a better world. It was like they couldn't see past where I came from, and it haunted me constantly. I decided I couldn't stay stuck in that cycle of bitterness. I had to keep going, for my mom, for my dad, and for myself. I had worked so hard to get here, I couldn't let the darkness swallow me up. I enrolled in college to study law, determined to become a lawyer who could help other people in situations like mine. I knew the road would be long, but I also understood that it was my only option. I had to keep fighting. The first semester was even harder than I had anticipated. College was a whole new world for me, full of people who didn't understand understand my background. Classmates, while kind, never failed to show me that I came from a completely different place than them. There were days when I felt more out of place than ever, and I wondered if all the sacrifice was really worth it. But something kept pushing me forward, something that told me that I had to prove to myself that I could do it, that it didn't matter where I came from. Months went by, and little by little, I started to find my place. My mom, although she was still in pain from losing Dad, began to see a spark of hope in me. For the first time, she really smiled at me when she saw me come home with my first exams passed. Something in her eyes told me that, despite everything we had lost, maybe, just maybe, there was still something to keep going. But despite the progress, my uncle, who had kept the farm and the power in the family, never stopped being a shadow over our lives. Every time he saw us, he smiled arrogantly, as if the victory in court had meant nothing. He treated me as if I were insignificant, as if my struggle and sacrifice were useless. This made me stronger. As I progressed through my studies, getting closer to reaching my goal, my mind kept thinking about how I had been manipulated by him, how he had played with my family's life without anyone being able to do anything. I was determined that he would not win. I wanted to become a real lawyer, someone who could give justice to people like my dad, someone who could protect the most vulnerable from abuses of power. Then, one day, I received unexpected news. My uncle was in trouble. At his company, an audit had revealed financial irregularities, and the authorities were investigating him for fraud. It was as if all the karma of his wrongdoings had finally caught up with him. Although, deep down, I felt satisfied by the justice that seemed to be coming, I couldn't help but wonder if this meant I should let my guard down. Something in me kept saying that I wasn't done yet. I had come a long way, but I still had a long way to go. At university, I began to excel in some subjects and got involved in pro bono legal projects, defending people who were in need like my family had once been. Somehow, I was finding my purpose, my true calling. I knew that, in the end, everything I had worked hard to achieve would be worth it. But deep inside, I still felt like there was something else I needed to do, something I couldn't let go of. The final exam was just around the corner. After years of constant struggle, I was closer than ever to achieving my goal, becoming a lawyer. But as I approached the end of this journey, the weight of everything I had experienced became heavier. My mom, who had been my unconditional support throughout this time, had begun to show signs of fatigue. Her health was no longer the same, and at times, I felt helpless seeing her so vulnerable. Everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed was for her, so that she could have a better life, so that she could smile again. However, now I was facing a new battle that I was not prepared to face. During one of my breaks from college, I received a call that would change everything. My mom had had a stroke. My world fell on me. The hours I spent in the hospital were the longest of my life. Although my classmates and friends supported me at all times, I knew that what I really needed at that moment was to be with her. On her deathbed, my mom looked at me with eyes full of love and pride. She took my hand, squeezing it with all her strength, and whispered, "You did it, son. I always knew you would do it." Those words stuck in my soul. It was all I needed to hear, but the pain of losing her pierced me like a dagger. I was alone. I had not only lost the person who gave me life, but also my source of strength. When I returned home, the silence was unbearable. The house that had once been filled with laughter and shared dreams now only echoed with an emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. I decided that I couldn't give up. Not for her, not for me, but for all those who, like my mom, had once silently fought for something better. My dad, even though he was no longer physically here, had planted a seed of hope in me that, despite everything, continued to grow. After much thought, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would go back to the trial against my uncle, not just for my family, but for everyone who had ever been trampled by people like him. It had been my fight from the beginning, and now I had the knowledge, strength, and motivation to finish what I had started. The trial was long and complicated, but in the end, the verdict was clear. The inheritance my uncle had illegally usurped would be returned to our family. That victory belonged not only to me, but to everything my mom and dad stood for, the fight for justice, truth, and dignity. Throughout this journey, I had learned that although fate can sometimes be cruel, one has the power to change their path. Life can beat us down, but if we are able to move on, if we are able to endure, then we can build a better future. My mom had left me an invaluable legacy, not only in her unconditional love, but in her example of struggle and sacrifice. And even though she was no longer by my side physically, I felt her presence in each of my achievements. It was at that moment that I understood what it truly meant to be a lawyer. It's not just about winning lawsuits or about achieving riches. It's about fighting for what's right, protecting the vulnerable, being a defender of the truth, even if the path is lonely and difficult. Years later, when I had already achieved my professional goals, I found myself sitting in an office, looking out the window. The city lights were shining in the distance, and in that moment, I felt that all the sacrifice sacrifice, all the tears, all the effort was worth it. I knew that I had changed not only my life, but the lives of those I had vowed to protect. And as I watched the people pass by, I realized that everything I had accomplished was not just for me. It was for everyone who, like me, ever dreamed of a better future, even when it seemed unattainable. My story, our story, was a testament that sacrifice and struggle are always worth it. And at last, I could close my eyes and feel the peace that had eluded me for so long.